audit and scrutiny panel. First ever online audit and scrutiny panel, I should say. I'm sure we're all used to the processes just now in terms of declarations of interest, comments, questions, and if we could use the chat bar, then that would be great. If not, if you'd be able to signal to me or Andrew, then that would be great if you're looking to come in to contribute to the meeting. We do have quite a lengthy agenda. There's a few really serious and interesting points that will need to be discussed today. So if Andrew, if you could please outline any apologies before we start with the agenda.
Yes, Convener, the only apology I've received is from Councillor Anderson.
Thank you very much. Is there any other apologies for today's meeting? No, okay, that's great. Okay, so if we can look at agenda item 1, which is declarations of interest in terms of ethical standards in public life. Do any members have any declarations of interest today? No, I can't see anything in the chat bar. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 is audit and risk related items, and it's the action log. Ken, is there any points that you wish to raise within agenda item 2 in the action log?
Thanks, Convener. Probably the only point really just to highlight is that the panel at its last meeting back in December 2019 focused on audit matters. I'm sure not many of us could remember exactly what was discussed at that meeting. There was a request for 2 specific reports on particular key corporate risks. Partly in discussion with yourself, we've taken the opportunity to not bring those reports to this meeting on the basis that there are some other kind of corporate risks that are much more significant at the current time, and we'll make sure that those reports that were requested in December are programmed into the future meeting.
That's great, Ken. Thank you very much for your update. And as you said, there's been a lot going on over the past few months, and I'm sure we've got to obviously now take things into priority in terms of what we look at as an audit and scrutiny panel. Does anyone have any comments or questions regarding agenda item 2? No, if that's the case, do we agree the recommendations to note the report? Thank you very much. Okay, so now we move into our solely audit related items, and agenda item 3 is PCI DSS compliance, and it's the progress report. We were scheduled to have an audit and scrutiny panel before lockdown happened, and there was meant to be a discussion on this during that time. Obviously, it's had to be delayed until today's meeting, but I would like to introduce Rob, and Rob Leach is going to speak to the report.
As I mentioned, in an audit report, and leading on from that, we've undertaken a bit of an exercise to understand the actual requirements PCI DSS wise. Hopefully this report summarises the work that's been done to date and what we plan to do to take things forward. I would propose to go through this report, if the attendees are amenable, on a section by section basis as opposed to a point by point basis, and I'm happy to pick up any questions at the end of each section. Assuming that's okay with everyone, I'll kick off. If you have the report, sorry.
Yes, Rob, thank you. Carry on.
I'll start off by looking at the background section to the report. Hopefully this is fairly self-explanatory. It outlines the history of the payment card industry data security standard and the Council's current posture to date towards compliance, and how North Lanarkshire Council has got to the position it's in regarding compliance. Hopefully we've been able to put a bit of context into payment card processes, particularly by identifying the volume and value of transactions over the year 2019-2020. I've also tried to pick up within the report on one of the key features of compliance, and I suppose that comes down to complexity. Hopefully section 1.5 indicates that we have got a reasonable number of merchant IDs just for the council by itself. So the council has 6 merchant IDs, but on top of that, there are additional merchant IDs for North Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture North Lanarkshire. These merchant IDs relate to different payment streams taking place across different locations, for example. When you add that into the number of systems and the complexity of the ICT systems that North Lanarkshire has, that clearly then leads us into a position where there is a fair degree of complexity associated with PCI DSS compliance. Does anyone have any questions on that particular section? I'll assume not. I'll move on to the next section then, which is planning for PCI DSS compliance. I've broken this down into 5 distinct parts. The first of those is called PCI DSS compliance requirements. Fundamentally, there are 12 separate requirements that PCI DSS expects an organisation to be able to adhere to. Those in turn are further broken down, in fact. At last count, I came up with a total of 328 separate requirements, conditions that an organisation such as North Lanarkshire Council would be expected to adhere to. Assessment is based on completion of a self-assessment questionnaire. There are, in fact, 4 different questionnaires. In fact, there are 9 different questionnaires because there are different flavours of some of these questionnaires. And it would appear, in fact, it wouldn't just appear, I'm convinced that South Ayrshire Council would have to complete self-assessment questionnaire D. And that is the most complex of all the self-assessment processes that PCI DSS expects organisations to follow. In fact, the PCI SSC Council call self-assessment questionnaire D extreme. So I hope I'm not painting a black picture, but it's a realistic picture of what we have to cover in order to try to achieve PCI DSS compliance. Have you any questions on that particular question, on that particular section, sorry? I'll move on to the next in that case. Sorry, and I was pointed out that someone, sorry, Katrina, you mentioned South Ayrshire Council there. I'm looking at, indeed, one of my ex-employer 2 years ago, apologies, it is North Lanarkshire Council, apologies. Temporary corrective actions. One of the first things that is currently planned for is updating chip and PIN devices to point-to-point encryption. We have taken a view of, should I say, we have had time to try to put in place certain controls since PCI DSS was picked up as a need to have by the council. So one of the first controls we are aiming to put in place is to ensure that our data, as it's transmitted across the council network, is encrypted. That actually takes out a lot of scope for PCI DSS compliance. If the data is encrypted, it would mean that it's no longer, in essence, cardholder data. The point-to-point encryption side of things is it will hopefully take place this month. It was due to happen earlier, but because of the COVID situation, couldn't, unfortunately. There are going to be changes made to the Pay 360 system as well, one of the council's back-end payment systems. So we will be looking to try and upgrade the AIM income management system, the ACR cash receipting system, together with the chip and PIN devices and the Pay.net system. PCI DSS expects systems to be compliant with other software, whether they're hardware, whether it's network, and covering the whole base of systems is an important aspect of compliance. There is an ongoing requirement to ensure that any network that takes cardholder payments is secured and proven to be secure. Now, the proving to be secure bit is undertaken through a scanning, regular scanning process. Effectively, we would have a third party who would scan the council's infrastructure looking for weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So the council has taken up a contract with an organisation called Hacker Guardian to deliver that particular service. In addition, the council has contracted with Lloyds Cardnet to provide ongoing support. Information security policies, guidance, etc., they form a big part of compliance as well. How we train staff and how we make staff aware of their obligations in a day-to-day sense with regard to information security. The council has recently approved a new information security policy. We've issued home working guidance as well, given the prevalence of that in light of COVID-19. Those are the temporary corrective actions we've taken to date. And I'll move on to the next section unless there are any questions on this one. I'll move on in that case to section number 3 under the planning for PCI DSS compliance part, which is future actions and recommendations. So fundamentally, what we would look to do is reduce exposure to compliance risk. In other words, de-scoping compliance obligations. Now, one of the things we're going to be doing, obviously, is putting in place point-to-point encryption, which will have an effect on that. But there's more to it than just that, clearly. De-scoping requires a sensible approach to designing technology, the technology through which card payments are processed. And really, this is where effort will lie. So it's about the technology, it's about the processes, it's about how we take the card payments. So that really means trying to understand data flows. For cardholder data, it's touch points within the NLC network and the people processes that go alongside those. One observation we've picked up on is that the mail order, well, the person not present payment channel, particularly the telephone channel, potentially brings much of the corporate network into scope. So we will be looking to derive value in a PCI DSS program by looking to see if that particular payment stream can somehow be, or the impact of that payment stream can be reduced upon the council. And there are various ways that can be performed, and that will be one of the options moving forward. We'd also look to derive value from possible controls that we might want to put on top of any particular network, or processing changes, such as a hunting exercise to look for cardholder data on the council. If we don't have the data on the council network, then quite simply we don't have the same degree of obligation for PCI DSS compliance. And the only other point to note is that there are third parties we can go to in terms of getting that level of expert advice that we might feel we may from time to time in delivering an in-house set of solutions. However, it has to be said, such advice is not inexpensive. So we'd need to take cognizance of risk versus benefit in that regard. In terms of the next section, risks to delivering and maintaining PCI DSS compliance, I would really want to home in on the complexity of council networks, of council systems, and the complexity of PCI DSS requirements. That doesn't mean, of course, it's not possible to achieve that. Of course it is, but it is going to be an exercise in terms of trying to understand, as I mentioned earlier, the data flows and the touch points within the council network for cardholder data. The less data we process, the less compliance requirements potentially we may have. Other aspects to note would be that we select the appropriate options to bring us into an appropriate level of compliance. We have appropriate governance structures in place to manage the ongoing nature of compliance within the local authority. And the risk, obviously, we actually over-engineer controls to meet PCI DSS requirements. There is a benefit to applying controls, but if we apply too much control, it both becomes expensive to the council and arguably becomes a resource drain as well in terms of having people to requiring people to implement those controls. Final observation is that because of COVID, we've had to temporarily change some of the processes we have in place, and we will need to look longer term in terms of how we handle payment processes, given the impact of COVID-19 and the uptake in home working. I don't know if anyone has any questions in that particular section. If not, the final section is next steps. Hopefully the report makes clear that there's not a straightforward magic bullet to bring us into a fully compliant state. We have a host of payment streams, a complex network structure. There still has to be a line drawn under some of the discovery aspects, but at the same time, we have managed to get to a position where we can start to identify potential options that might address some of the compliance constraints we've got. Clearly, there's going to be a resource impact in taking the council to compliance, but not just in terms of taking us there, but also in terms of the longer term state to keep us compliant. But overall, we're moving forward, and I would anticipate that very quickly we'll be in a position to start considering the options that are most likely to take us to a compliant position in an efficient and effective manner. Really, that is a summation of the report, and I'm obviously quite happy to take any questions on any aspect of it.
Thanks very much, Rob. I mean, it's a very detailed report, and we really appreciate you taking the time to go through and explain the sections of the report as well, because it is a minefield. PSI DSS compliance is complex. I mean, there's no way of getting around that. I do see that there's two members looking to come in. We've got Councillor Burrows first, please.
Convener, thank you for that, and thank you, Mr. Leach, for your detailed explanation. I noted, and I may be wrong, but I noted at least 6 or 7 times you used the word complex or complexity. So I know where you're coming from that. Equally, I know the importance of this, Convener, and that's why it's here today. A couple of questions, Mr. Leach, is that I know COVID has an impact on where we're moving forward to, but in this case, question is, why are we behind? This a question is, why are we behind? The other thing is that you said there that we could do this fairly quickly. I think I'd be looking for, Convener, a timeline on that. There's nothing that suggests in the paper of that. I always think it's well to do that. Either that or I've missed that. And the third part of the question, Convener, is where does this link in with the digital NL programme that we're moving forward with, that we will be discussing quite a lot as we move ahead? Thanks, Convener. 3 parts.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Very important questions. And Rob, can I bring you back in to answer those, please?
Of course. I'm obviously happy for Katrina to step in as well if there's anything she'd like to add to my answers. In terms of the complexity, yeah, that's an absolute, it is a complex piece of work. In terms of getting us quickly to a state of compliance, I'm not so sure that will be something that can happen quickly. I think we can quickly derive in order to take us to compliance, but in terms of actually implementing these options, I would say that is unlikely to be a quick fix. The other question regarding digital NL, well, there is a programme in place to move certain payment systems onto a digital NL platform, a Microsoft platform, and the particular compliance requirements that we would be expected to ensure are in place will be addressed through each particular phase of that programme. So that will be addressed as part of any digital NL piece. I think it's just going to take a bit of time for us to actually get to a position where we can say we feel we are compliant. The complexity aspect is what is going to take the time, the complexity both of the requirements and of the council's processes. And really, I guess that's why it's taken us the length of time it's taken us to get to this position right here, right now. There have been competing demands to perform other tasks and other activities. And it's about resourcing PCI DSS effectively in order to take the council to a compliant position in a timely manner. In terms of timeline, absolutely. I think we should have a roadmap for this exercise, and I would be expecting this exercise to be well managed in that respect, to be managed in accordance with the Council's defined project management framework. It isn't just a task, this is going to be a significant project.
Thanks, Rob. I mean, I totally share Councillor Burrow's concerns there. You know, and there should be a time frame. You've mentioned the time frame, but you've not actually detailed the length of that time frame, and you've not detailed, you know, when this roadmap will be, you know, considered or reviewed or carried out. So can you expand on that, or Katrina, could she perhaps expand on that? And I don't know, Councillor Burrows, you want to come back in on the point that you'd made originally with that response?
I think, Convener, we all identify we've got to prioritise whatever we do forward. I get that. And all of that is linked to resources, and I get that too. But if this is as important as I think it is, given the way ahead, I think there should be a timeline on it. But equally, what I didn't get was about the reason why we're behind with this. And that's important. I see Katrina nodding her head, whether that's able to provide some information. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Burrows. Rob, Katrina, could we come back in on that one, please?
Yes, I'll come in. Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for that, Convener. So just to add to what Rob said, so why we're behind is absolutely key. So you can see from the report and from Rob's presentation there that we have got ourselves into an accepted state of compliance in that we can carry on with payments just now because of the actions that we've taken over the last year now. I was going to say last 6 months, but the last year to get Lloyd's CardNet to allow us to continue. And so that we've got this ongoing process now that we're making sure that they're satisfied that our card payments are correct. But what we had said was we needed to do that option appraisal, and the point-to-point encryption was one of those first things that we wanted to undertake, Councillor Burrows. And that point-to-point encryption requires the security team, and it requires a secure access team. And to be honest, they were all diverted, as you can imagine, to get the remote working solutions up. So we only have a small team to be able to take that forward. So they were suspended because getting everyone access to remote working was considered to be the priority. So that explains the why we're behind. So we still have resource challenges because we've still got a significant number of services that we do need to recover. But we absolutely do believe that this is crucial that we take this forward. So the projects, particularly in cash receipting that Rob mentioned that we're taking forward, are now ready to go, and we do think that we'll have them linked up this month, and we're intending to complete that this month. So that takes us to that point, and we can start to do that de-scoping, but that does require, Rob mentioned 328 specific questions. Not all are IT, some are specifically about the processes that the staff use, and the staff are across the council, and large numbers of them sit in Elaine's area in revs and benefits, and they too were under significant pressure during COVID, so we've not been able to have that dialogue and the interaction with the service to start thinking about some of the de-scoping. But again, we hope to be able to get that back on track. Once we have those meetings with the project team that's listed throughout the report, we'll be able to bring that timeline. And to be honest, I totally expected that would be a question. We would love to be able to say, we think we'll be able to go through and assess because it's about getting that balance. We don't want to put onerous security restrictions on people if we can avoid it. So we'll try and de-scope the network, as Rob said. And then the final point, it's intrinsically linked to digital NL. And as we start to deploy the new website and the payments portal through there, and that's linked in for October, then again, we'll start to be able to really get de-scope those 328 questions. So what I would like to do, either next cycle or the cycle after, once we've got the new portal up, is to create that detailed roadmap that Rob referenced, because I think we'll be in the place to be able to do that then, and be able to give members some comfort that although we've got accepted compliance at the moment, we don't have formal compliance, and I get why we absolutely need to have that for an organisation like ourselves.
Thank you very much for your further explanation, Katrina. Councillor Burrows, does that reassure you in terms of pushing for some form of timeline, recognising
That's
the balance?
fine, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. We do have a number of other members looking to come in. Councillor Hume, I believe you're next.
Thanks, Chair. I've had some involvement with PCI in the past, and I agree it's complex, and I agree that perhaps the council would be even more complex using it than a normal organisation. I have to say I feel a slight bit of disappointment that we got the report we did where we didn't comply, because the compliance measures are well documented and well understood. So that's a caveat in there and where we are and why we're here. In terms specifically about the report, I would like some timescales to get to compliance, whether we need to address every issue, or are there certain that are mandatory, and then plans to do more. So we need we need timescales to get to compliance. And Bob has already said that this is a critically important process. The reputational damage to the council and the commercial damage would be significant if the card payments were withdrawn. Can you imagine that? So this is the seriousness of this issue can't be underestimated. There's already been some useful steps taken. I think they should have been taken some time ago, but we are where we are just now. In terms of your comments, Rob, about actions that you could possibly take in terms of security people and engaging specialists, there's always a balance in the council between spending and results from doing that spending. But I think in this set of circumstances, the balance should be on doing whatever's needed and spending whatever's needed to make sure that we get compliance as soon as possible. So get the security people in, get the consultant in, and get that done. The roadmap that's been mentioned, I would like to see that at the next audit and scrutiny meeting. It's just so that it assures councillors that there's a clear position and understood and accepted and agreed actions that are taking in the roadmap with timescales, and that should give us comfort that we'll meet the dates we need with the steps we're planning to take. But also within that'll get us to compliance. I would like to see something in there that the residual organisational changes will make sure that we stay compliant in the future, and we don't have another committee meeting that says there's been issues with keeping compliance. So get to compliance and then reassure members that the steps that have been taken will guarantee compliance in the future. A couple of questions in there, as well as some comments, if perhaps Rob or Katrina could answer them.
Katrina, or
So, sorry, Rob, just a second. Thank you very much, Councillor Hume. No, I fully agree, and I will be speaking to Katrina and Rob after the meeting to make sure that a further updated paper is presented at the next audit and scrutiny panel meeting, and then that should obviously, let us see the progress that's been made between this meeting now and obviously the one that will take place in the future. So I hope that reassures you from a convener perspective that I will chase this up. But Katrina, Rob, can I bring the two of you in, please, to address Councillor Hume's concerns and questions?
Absolutely. Katrina, I'll just quickly say that I wouldn't disagree with any of the comments, to be perfectly honest, that were stated there. Our roadmap is fundamental to taking us towards a position of compliance. It needs this is an exercise that needs management as a project. It needs to be managed as a project or a programme, and certainly one of the initial steps in that methodology would be to create that roadmap of tasks and really to set ourselves not so much of a deadline, but a pragmatic date or time in the future when we can say, right, we have achieved a level of compliance that we feel we can be satisfied with. That has to be predicated on the fact that we can only be satisfied at a certain point in time. And as was mentioned, we need to ensure ongoing compliance and risk appetite, the risk environment. These things change over time. So it's not a case of we achieve compliance, then there's a line drawn under this as an exercise. It will require ongoing resource to keep us in a position that we feel meets our compliance needs. That was really all from me. I don't know if you have anything to add, Katrina.
Just very briefly, I totally agree with what Councillor Hume said, and as I proposed, we will bring that roadmap back in next cycle. About the QSA, and again, I appreciate the support for the QSA. When I took up as head of service of business solutions last year, and we were looking at this area and understood that we had no compliance. And I've held off so far because it is a very expensive thing, just with the council's challenging financial situation, because of the uncertainty that we had about the digital NL programme. And as I said in response to Councillor Burrow's question, it is intrinsically linked because it's linked to the payments and what we're doing in the portal. So what my proposal was, and we'll build this into that roadmap, is to wait until all of that's gone live and we can actually understand how many of those 328 questions we now actually have compliance with, because we've changed those processes and can respond on that. And then if we feel that we still have a number of areas wherein a QSA would be beneficial, then we would ask for approval there through digital transformation and digitisation as well, where our financial monitoring is considered for that expenditure, because currently we obviously don't have the budget for that. But yeah, absolutely agree with everything you said there, Councillor Hume, and the importance of it.
Chair, can I just have another comment?
Absolutely, Councillor Hume.
Thank you. I appreciate the consideration for digital NL, Katrina. There's absolutely no point in doing work and having to redo it a short time later, so that's completely understandable. I did ask in my question specifically earlier about timescales for compliance. Do we know when the financial industry people will withdraw compliance unless we've met certain conditions? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I can come back in on that. Yes, sorry. No, so because of the process that we've got in place and what Rob said, we've got kind of a contract with the Cabinet just now where they're actually working with us month to month to make sure that we're maintaining compliance, and just with all of the steps that Rob's given us. So at this point in time, as long as they know that we've got that in place and that we've got an action plan, then there isn't any real threat to it. But we have continued to make sure that we maintain that relationship with them for the reasons that you've said, that we absolutely can't have that reputational risk of not being able to take card payments. So they haven't put a timeline on it as yet. And once we've got the portal up and running and we can see what that looks like, then we'll be able to have that roadmap and then work with them to hopefully get all 320 areas agreed.
Thanks, Katrina. With that, I'm sure that gives all the members a measure of comfort that safeguards there with the work that you're planning to do to deliver everything that has been identified as required. So that's fine for me. Thanks.
A comment, question? Councillor Valentine?
Yes, specifically to 2.9, with the checks, the quarterly checks using the Hacker Guardian, not on the same time scales as everything else. It's not quite up and running yet. And on a follow on from that, how will that be reported to the council? Will it be through audit and scrutiny? Will it be through finance? Because obviously this is these checks that are going to be put in place will be very important to the ongoing ability to keep these card compliance for the council? Thanks.
I can
Thank you,
take,
Councillor.
sorry,
Right, Rob, on you coming?
I was going to say I can take that one on, at least initially. So the Hacker Guardian scans happen currently. They happen monthly, in fact. Hacker Guardian is an organisation that provides an accredited scanning service. That's one that's been accredited by the PCI Security Standards Council. And we currently process each of those scans on a quarterly basis. It identifies any vulnerabilities that put us into a position of non-compliance in terms of the ICT network, and we act upon those there and then at the time. It's a process, it's an ongoing process. It's not one that we would be looking to change in the immediate future. It works very well. However, I would expect there to be regular assurance checks undertaken that the scanning process is doing what it's meant to do as part of a general check, as it were, on security practice within the local authority. So there will need to be that sort of built-in back-end assurance check, really, that we're scanning the appropriate parts of the network and we're not scanning insignificant parts of that network. But beyond that, it's an ongoing process and it's in place right now.
Thanks, Rob. And Councillor Valentine also asked, how will it be monitored? Will it go to Finance and Resource Committee, for example, or would it be further papers to Audit and Scrutiny? So would it go to the Parent Committee first and then Audit and Scrutiny, or would it just go to the Parent Committee?
So I'll respond on that for you. So as Rob said, this happens already, and our information governance and security risk, which as everyone knows is one of our high risks and was considered at the last panel. This is one of our mitigating controls. We can add that additional action if agreed necessary to be able to monitor that and make sure it's okay. But the deep dive of that comes to the panel regularly, so there is that opportunity for further interrogation here. This wouldn't ordinarily go to transformation and digitisation again, unless those elected members ask for something, but it wouldn't go to policy and strategy.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Councillor Valentine, does that answer your questions?
Fine, thank you.
Thanks very much. I believe Councillor Stevenson, you're next, and then Councillor Graham following.
Thanks, Convener. Quite obviously a complex situation, and as Councillor Burrows stated, that was used quite a number of times. I think most of the IT things that we come across in audit and scrutiny are complex, and we understand that. We understand there's a resource and capacity aspect to that as well. However, when we're using language like complex quite a few times, aiming to put in place, hopefully looking to try, then we understand that officers are having a hard time of it. When you're using language like that, then to me, there's a lack of resource, capacity, whatever it may be. I think, I've sat on this audit and scrutiny for 3 years now, and I think IT has always come back and it's been pushed out. I think what I would want to know is, and we're talking about timelines and 328 questions, and I don't confess to understanding everything that you're doing with that, and I don't think any of us would. But what I would like is, I would like a real good guesstimate, that good Scottish word, a guesstimate for when we will be hopefully compliant. I think to come back, and Rob's smiling there because I can understand that he's probably thinking, well, that's a difficulty right away, and I do understand that, Rob. But I think, we as a committee definitely need to have a good handle on timelines. Is it going to be 2 years? Is it going to be, if the council gave the full resource and capacity, would it be done within 6 months? I think that we need to, for me, that needs to be nailed down a little bit just to try and get to that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevenson. Completely agree on the points that you've made. A guesstimate, as you said, great Scottish word. So, Rob, do you have a guesstimate to reassure Councillor Stevenson and the rest of the panel?
I can provide a guesstimate, but I'm scared I might put my foot in it with regards to Katrina. I don't know if you've got a view on this, Katrina, as opposed to myself. I have got a guesstimate, but would you prefer to stick your finger in there on this one, Katrina? That's probably a wrong
No,
analogy.
I would, thanks, and I think it is. It's down to a couple of things. So the links to the digital NL programme, which I've mentioned a few times, I think we need to get that platform up and running and understand the implications it has there, so we can see what's left for ourselves in financial solutions to be able to take forward. Because as I say, not all of it is linked into the system, although the system bits are the bits that make the complexities. So with all of that in mind, if I had to have a guesstimate, then I would say a year.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Councillor Stevenson, do you have any follow-up questions or comments in relation to?
No, thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, Rob. That was a question that was loaded, probably, and you're probably thinking, oh my goodness. It's purely because we have sat and looked at IT things before and have constantly come back. I mean, I'm talking about 3 years ago. They came up and they had been left since before our time in the committee. So I know actually sticking your head in the noose there and saying a year takes quite a bit to do, but I do appreciate that. But it's just to give us a rough idea. So thanks very much for that. I do appreciate it.
Chair,
Thank you very much.
Can I just say, this is the virtual meeting here on my screen. Katrina and Rob are together on the screen, and it's the first time in a virtual meeting I've seen someone wishing they could kick someone under the table to stop them from speaking. So that's quite interesting to see that. First time I've seen it in a virtual meeting.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Hume. Councillor Graham, I believe you've got a specific question to, I think it's section 2.14, is that right?
That's correct, Convener, and thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. How much would it cost to engage somebody, a qualified security assessor, on the basis of the complexities as described here? It would appear to be a good value for money, but what sort of cost are we talking about?
Rob, Katrina, who's going to take this one?
I can field this one, possibly just given my interaction with contractors, etc. in the past. So typical daily rate, you're talking about 1,200 quid. How many days? You could be talking. It depends if they dive in and out. So if it's a dive in and out, provide expert advice over the course of a year, you might be looking at, say, 20 days over the course of a year, something like that. That would be very much stick my finger on the air in terms of the level of support we'd be looking for. But as a daily rate, you're talking probably 1,200 quid, to be honest, maybe even as high as 15 for someone like a QSA.
Councillor Graham, have you got a follow-up question for Rob there?
Well, a nice piece of work if you can get it, obviously, Rob, I would suggest. And however, given the complexity of what we're talking about here, it probably seems a really good suggestion. I know it's a recommendation. Can I just ask one additional question with your indulgence, Chair?
Yeah.
Has there been, I noticed in 224, we talked about under the current directive, staff are working at home and there's risks, obviously. Has there been anything flagged up or is anything surfaced?
Rob, Katrina, who will take this one?
Certainly not that I'm aware of, obviously, and Ken can probably pick up on any specifics as well. So as we went into COVID, then we put that COVID lens on to see what other risks there were from the changed working practices, and this was one of them. And obviously we had our concerns that people were then sitting in their homes, taking people's details, making payments, but we've caveated that with the guidance that's gone out and obviously the regular interactions that team leads have with their staff. So there's nothing come to me as the zero so far. And we have a data management team and a data governance board that meet. And Archie Aitken and his team also bring any breaches or any concerns there. And there's certainly nothing come to that either. So to my knowledge, there's been no issues arisen, although we do still consider that to be quite a risk. And just while I'm speaking, so that the figure I had been given, so Rob's my new information and risk manager. He joined us this year and was landed with driving this forward, and then we went into COVID. But last year, the the daily rate I was quoted was £1,500, and that explains why my first reaction was, well, let's get a handle on this first before we start giving £1,500 a day out to people without us truly understanding where we could actually make changes ourselves.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Katrina. Thank you both.
Thank you. Ken, I do believe you've got a couple of comments that you're hoping to make.
Yeah, it was really just to reiterate and pick up on the point that Katrina's made. I mean, clearly moving, at short notice to, significantly revised working arrangements presented some additional risks. So there was quite a lot of thought and effort went into looking at how we could best, mitigate those risks, recognising that some of them are quite difficult. But I think we've done that as effectively as we could have. In terms of whether anything has occurred, well, certainly we're obviously the lead contact for a lot of the external agencies who would have concerns regarding frauds and potential fraudulent issues, and we've not had anything in the period that's been linked to card processing. So I'll give the panel some comfort, hopefully.
Thanks very much for that, Ken. That's very useful. I don't see any further comments or questions on the chat bar. I would like to amend the recommendations slightly with members' approval to add a recommendation 3. I know recommendations one is to note the contents of the report, and number 2 is to note the significant work still required, which we have discussed in depth. But I would like to add on a third recommendation, and that's for a further paper to be brought to the next Audit and Scrutiny panel, and it's to highlight the route map that's been discussed, and also timeframes for PSI's DSS compliance. Are members agreeable to that?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Is anyone otherwise? No, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So if there's no further comments or questions, I'd like to move on to agenda item 4, which is the internal audit annual report for 2019-2020. And Ken, I believe you're speaking to this report.
Yeah, thanks everybody. This report obviously is for those who've been on the panel before will have seen this. There is a requirement under the public sector internal audit standards that I present an annual report and which includes an opinion on the internal audit's view on the council's risk governance and internal control arrangements. So this report fulfills that requirement, provides an overview of the activities of the function during the 1920, highlights a number of the issues. And presents that formal opinion. I'll not go through the report in a huge amount of detail, really just to reiterate 2 or 3 points on the way through. So section 1 of the report really just sets out the kind of the formal basis under which internal audit operates, and it's also worth reminding ourselves of that from time to time in terms of the internal audit strategy that was approved by the panel last year, and the internal audit charter that was approved the year before, and those set out the framework and the kind of the how internal audit is expected to operate. We've obviously reported our outputs regularly throughout the year in accordance with the reporting protocol that we put in place. Section 2, obviously the activity during the year was broadly in accordance with the plan that was approved by the panel back in June 19, and Appendix 2, which again I think we've put forward in previous years, shows the key details of when those reports and work was done and what stage it was at. That's the status as at the 7th of May 2020, because for obvious reasons this was finalised sometime after the end of the financial year, and in the absence of any meetings of the panel. It's been a while, so obviously time has elapsed since the report, so just to bear that in mind. Section 2 really just also reiterates the requirement that we've got to basically assess ourselves against those external standards to give you some comfort and assurance that we're operating in an appropriate manner. 2 elements to that. One is that external audit look at our work each year in terms of whether they can place reliance on it. And during the year in question, I'm pleased to say that they were able to continue to do so. So that's one of the kind of KPIs that we have. The second one obviously relates to our own self-assessment against the public sector internal audit standards. This year, there is a requirement under the standards that there is an external review at least once every 5 years. So we had that during this financial year. The results of that were reported to the panel in September, and that report concluded that we fully conform with the standards. So again, that's one of our kind of KPIs. It's fair to say that the work that we've hadn't planned to progress some of the actions arising from that in terms of improvement actions. That piece of work have not necessarily been progressed as quickly as we would have wanted. I'm conscious that that's something we need to pick up. Obviously, other events have kind of got in the way of lots of the kind of routine business. And then finally, really just to confirm, I'm required to confirm that there were no impairments on or restrictions in terms of senior management or senior elected members in terms of the role and the work that we carried out during the year. So I'm pleased to be able to confirm that formally. From paragraph 2.8 onwards, I really just reflect on last year's overall opinion was qualified in respect of the sort of transitional nature of the council's then current performance management arrangements, and the report outlines some of the activity that there was during the year in relation to that issue. On the basis of that, I have removed that aspect from the qualification of the annual opinion. Clearly, progress has been a bit slower, I think, than everybody would have expected, although we can see that is now being sort of re-stepped up and management attention being given to that. So we'll be looking at that during 2021, but that has been removed from the overall qualification of the opinion. I think generally, and I think it's important at this time to reflect that each individual audit report always finds issues or generally find issues and areas for improvement. But overall, which is what the report's about, there were no specific things which impacted on our ability to give a kind of clean audit opinion. I think we've got a fairly positive view of the council's governance, risk and internal control arrangements. We're also quite satisfied in terms of compliance with corporate governance. And there were no issues in relation to financial controls or financial management arrangements that I think we need to highlight at this time. The report also has a couple of paragraphs really just reflecting on COVID-19. Clearly that started to impact on the council's governance and control arrangements from primarily from mid-March. So it's only really the 2 or 3 week period at the end of the year in question. But clearly there were a lot of changes to operating arrangements at quite short notice, and we'll say a little bit more about how we reacted to that from an audit perspective in some of the subsequent reports. But obviously some of the control frameworks have undergone significant change. I think I'm satisfied that the arrangements remained reasonably robust throughout that period, and I've said that at paragraph 220. But the specific timing of that and the absence of us being able to do some specific work in the period between the end of March and signing the audit opinion means that we're sort of effectively signposting that our opinion relates to the 49 weeks up till mid-March rather than the specific 2-3 week period at the end of the financial year. Although, as I say, I'm reasonably satisfied that there are no major issues arising from that. So that's the kind of overview of the plan. As I say, the appendix provides appendix 1 is the opinion, and appendix 2 is a sort of overview of how we performed against the plan. That's all I really want to highlight, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ken, for your explanation of the report there. Certainly when I looked at the report, it was Appendix 2 that caught my attention, because you've got 3 items within Appendix 2, early learning, years and childcare, debtors and also creditors that have all provided a limited level of assurances. So perhaps you could maybe pick up on that first, just before I go into questions.
Yeah, well, as I said during the earlier comments, we obviously produced a number of reports during the year which went to the panel. I think if I take them in reverse order, in terms of 1140, that was at the time a fairly critical report, and I think the panel had a long discussion about that, and in terms of the management response. Subsequent to that, a detailed report was taken by the service to the relevant service committee, providing some feedback and comment in response to the actions that were being taken following the receipt of the audit report. And I think from that, together with the follow-up work that we've done to date, means that we're reasonably comfortable that that's not sufficient to qualify the overall opinion. I think you'll see from a later agenda item, we have got some follow-up work on that topic proposed in the annual plan for this year as well. So that's that. I mean, in relation to the other financial systems, I think we've done follow-up work in relation to both of those. And I think at the time I indicated that the management responses to both those audit reports were appropriately robust in terms of the actions being taken and the timeliness of the actions being taken. So on an ongoing basis, I don't have any significant concerns over either of those kind of financial systems.
That's great, Ken. Thank you very much. I see Councillor Hume's looking to come in with a question. Councillor Hume.
Thanks, Chair. Just a minor point. Ken, on page 18, Appendix 2, there's a note 6. I don't see any of the items relating to a note 6 above. So if there's nothing for note 6, that's fine. If it's a typo, maybe you could let us know which of the items in the table relate to note 6. And if you're not sure offhand, send members an email when you get a chance to look at it.
I'm just looking at that. I think I would need to take minutes to have a look. So can I get a note to you on that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Councillor Hume. Do we have any further comments or questions on agenda item 4? No, and there's no further need for additional reports to be requested? No, that's great. Are we happy to note the recommendations? Thank you very much. Okay, if we can move on to agenda item 5, which is the Internal Audit 2020-21 Annual Plan. And Ken, if you could speak to the report, please.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. The purpose of this report is to present for approval the internal audit plan for 2021, and this report sets out the background and context within which the plan has been prepared. As this exec summary on the front page says, it follows a reasonably well-established planning methodology now to ensure sort of cyclical coverage of key risks, key corporate risks, key governance processes, and key financial systems. And it is also designed to provide a body of work that enables the preparation of the annual opinion at the end of the year, which we've obviously just seen in relation to the previous financial year. This report was submitted to and considered by the corporate management team in April, but I think it's important that section 1 sort of outlines that the plan is for me to submit and have a discussion with you about. It's not for senior management to approve the plan, so it's very much submitted to them for their consideration, and we have a bit of a discussion about it. In terms of particular things to highlight, in terms of section 2, really 2 sets out the nuts and bolts of how the plan is prepared, and I think I use this metaphor every year. I should really get a new one, but it's an art masquerading as a science. There is a kind of relatively well-established expectation in terms of professional standards, what a proposed internal audit programme will comprise. But it clearly also needs to be hugely reflective of a whole range of factors which are kind of factored and outlined in that section. So in terms of, sort of formal things, we'll continue to deliver this programme in accordance with the necessary standards. I think we've highlighted in paragraph 210, I'm also required annually to consider the adequacy of resources to enable me to discharge the function. I'm not indicating any concerns or difficulties there. The team remains at a steady state, so we're comfortable with that. I'm also required to confirm or otherwise the continuing independence of the service and our ability to act in accordance with kind of expected professional practice, free from undue interference by management, and I'm happy to be able to do so. And I think in both those aspects, I've highlighted in the report that where any issues are in relation to either of those aspects to arise during the year, I would discuss them with the convener in the first instance and with the panel thereafter. In terms of the kind of main body of the report, you'll be pleased. There's 4 lengthy appendices. I'm not planning to go into them in any great length. But really just to provide a kind of complete transparency for the panel. I think I did the same last year and it seemed to be relatively well received. So in terms of the appendices, Appendix 1 is actually the proposed audit plan with some broad outline of the proposed scope of each of the exercises. Appendix 2 gives you an oversight of internal audit coverage of key corporate risks over the last 5 years. Just really to put a marker down there that the corporate management team will be reviewing the kind of key corporate risk register later this month, but I don't expect there to be any significant changes as a result of that. Appendix 3 has got coverage of the key financial systems over the last 5 years as well, just so you can see the routine cyclical coverage we get there. And at Appendix 4, I've taken the Council's revised programme of work, which obviously constitutes some of the major things that the Council is now about. And I've put some narrative there in terms of indication of current and previous audit coverage, and some narrative to explain perhaps why things are or haven't been included in this year's plan. So that's the plan. I'm happy to take any questions on any aspects of that.
Thank you very much, Ken. I see Councillor Burrows is looking to come in with a question.
Convener, thank you. I really want to maybe speak, Convener, about the appendices. I think the plan, the report itself is explanatory, but there's some comments on the, and if I can, Convener, I've got 3 questions on Appendix 1, and then if you don't mind, after they're answered, maybe I could ask 2 or 3 other questions on Appendix 2 forward. Are you okay with that?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Burrows.
Okay, I think it's important first to say that every item in the plan is vital. We know that, and everything on the list is really, really important. But Ken's touched on it, but I want to ask him. He mentioned a specific section. My question was, do you have enough staff? I think you've already answered it to a degree by saying that your resources are okay for what you need. So if COVID, has COVID had an input then on the number of items? I see there's 37 on the list, 36 plus 100 hours contingency, Convener. So that's my second point. My third point is, who prioritises the list? Is it the plan to get through every single one of them? Or some of them may have been done, but who priorities it? Thanks, Convener. If you allow me back in after the answer, that would be appreciated. Thanks.
Not a problem, Councillor Burrows. Ken, could you answer those questions for Councillor Burrows, please?
Yeah, I think on resources, I mean, I obviously made the earlier comment. I think there's no... can you still hear me? My signal's just dropped out. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Ken.
You can, right? Okay. Yeah, on resources, yeah, I mean, we have a similar level of resources that we have had this year, and I think that's appropriate. We do a bit of kind of informal benchmarking. There's no formula by which you can assess the adequacy or otherwise of internal audit resources, and again, perhaps it would be easier if there was. But I think, looking at other comparable councils, we are relatively well resourced, but not over resourced. I hasten to add before Finance Convener wishes to remove some of my resources as a saving, but I think we're adequately resourced compared to other authorities. In terms of kind of the second point around contingency and impact of COVID, yeah, I mean, I think I've said in the narrative, each year we kind of vary the plan at the margins, and we account for that to the panel, particularly in terms of the annual report, where we kind of explain clearly why certain things that were in the plan may not have been done, and why others that weren't originally in the plan were done, and that happens each year. I think across internal audit at the moment, there is a recognition that the pace of some of the changes that are arising as a result of the kind of policy response to pandemic, creates sometimes unexpected challenges around governance and control. So I think we need to be flexible in terms of what we end up looking at during the financial year. Although I think to some extent, and again we'll pick this up in a future report, that a lot of those initial changes we've already done some work on and provided some comfort and assurance on. And in terms of prioritising the list, we don't formally prioritise them, and we certainly we probably do informally, but we don't communicate that to management. When and how, in which order we do them is largely a matter which we take the lead on, but clearly we need to have discussions and dialogue with relevant chief officers to ensure that the work is programmed at a time that's not overly inconvenient to them. I'm not going to say it's never not inconvenient, because I suspect most of the heads of service who are on the call would probably say that it's inconvenient every time. But so we're very much in control of that, and that's a judgment we'll make in terms of, as we progress through the year, what changes need to be made, and if so, which additional work is required in particular areas. What do we look to not to do that was in the plan? So hopefully that gives again some comfort that that's kind of professionally led by the audit function and not by management.
Councillor Burrows, does that answer your questions there, and you want to move on to your other questions?
I'm going to move on, Convener, but just to say, the reason I'm asking about the resource implication, COVID has meant that the change of working pattern has happened. The people that are working from home, all of that. That was why I was asking that specific question. But I dare say Ken has taken that on board when he's responding to the committee report, and he's obviously satisfied that his staff can work from a distance and do it that way. Can I move on, Convener? Appendix 2. Now, bearing in mind that what we're talking about is internal audit on current key corporate risks, it's important that I say that. And I draw your attention to page 33 of the report. And at the bottom of that page is a section number 21. Now, the reason I'm bringing this to the attention is it's about tackling poverty. Now, I see that the last report we done on audit was about 5 years ago, almost to the month. And for me, I said at the beginning of my comment, every category is vital. Everyone is, but we don't have infinite resources. I get all that. But I would have thought there would have been something in there or a comment in there. But linking in with that, if you don't mind, Convener, moving forward to page 39. And again, this is about Appendix 4, about consideration of programme work for 2021. If you look at halfway down the page, on page 39, it's code PO31.1. Yep, and that's for getting it right for every child. Linking that with below that PO35.1, and that is about the ASN provision. I need to say that the Convener, you and I and others here today were involved in nearly a year's programme looking at ASN provision. You'll be well aware of that. And again, in both instances, it's no, right? And again, this is a programme of taking that forward. So it's just, I've got a bit of concern about that, especially given that last one about getting it right for every child linked with the ASN provision, linking all of that with poverty-related matters. So I would be keen to get any kind of comment back from Adam.
Thanks very much, Councillor Burrows, and you're right. I think, you know, every single item on that paper is important, but we do need to have explanations as to why things are not being considered this year. Ken, can you come in and provide?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. Yeah, I mean, I agree very much that what we're not saying in not identifying something for inclusion in the audit plan this year is that it is unimportant. Clearly all those issues by definition in terms of either inclusion in the corporate risk register or the programme of work are seen as significant. I think what I'm saying is that we need to be informed by a range of factors, which is partly previous audit coverage. It's partly our view of and knowledge around how that issue is currently being managed, governed. So for instance, obviously some of those issues, there are recognisable and understandable and well-established governance arrangements around how those issues are progressed, where there are, from regular reports to appropriate kind of governance bodies, whether that's internally at officer level or to committees externally. In terms of elected member understanding. So I think in tackling poverty, I think I've said in the narrative there, it's quite a difficult issue to audit from a kind of traditional control perspective. Clearly, it's at the heart of a number of different policy initiatives and activities and programmes that the council is taking forward. In terms of some of the educational stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think at ASN, I think we all understand the history of that, and I can recognise why there might be some desire for an independent view on that. I think my view is at the moment in terms of priorities, we've got other things we need to look at. But as I say, I think the important thing is to say, we're not saying that anything that's not included in the plan is not worthy of inclusion. It's just we've obviously got to prioritise and use our relatively scarce resource in the best and most effective way possible.
Councillor Burrows, does that reassure you, or do you have a follow-up question?
Convener, I think I said to you at the start, I understand every topic that's on here is important, and I've picked up from Ken that tackling poverty within a corporate sense is going to be difficult. I get that, Ken. I understand that. It may well be, convener, that maybe members on the committee, including myself, so I'm saying maybe should have had more input into this about where we think we should be getting direction, where to proceed with what we think is important. But the ASN provision, convener, you know the time and energy has been spent on that, and I know as a current member, as other members on the committee will know, that whilst this is in its infancy on the new changes, I get that. If there had been something in the commentary that said it would have been picked up for 21-22 to let it bed in, I would have got that, but it wasn't there, it wasn't done. And I actually meant to say that for the future use, without adding on to it, there is a section, I'd marked it off on page 40, where it talks about, this is for plans for the future, it talks about, it's in the paper, tackling poverty. And it's there in P005.1, and it says, including the plan, no. So I'm saying to you, there's clearly a pattern there, convener, that anything linked to tackling poverty and the likes of that is not included. I get Ken's point, and I get the resource issue. I get all of that. I'm only an individual councillor raising my concerns that way, convener, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. And I think it is, it's absolutely right that every item on that is important. We have discussed that, it is the case, and I don't think items that have not been put forward are any less important than the items that have been put forward. But you've hit the nail on the head. We've got limited resources, and the council has to plan in terms of what's happening right here, right now. I'm not trying to say that some items are more important than others, but there's obviously been a reason why they have been put forward the way they have. Ken, do you have any further comments on that, just to provide further reassurance, in terms of especially member input? I think that's a point that Councillor Burrows is making.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well. One needs to be mindful in this around the role of internal audit, and clearly internal audit is an important. You would expect me to say that independent kind of assurance function. It is in terms of the kind of the internal audit kind of model. It's very much what they call the third line of defence. So in other words, there's a first line of defence, which is is management's initial control arrangements, and then there's that second tier, which is other ways in which stakeholders get assurance, and it may well be as I say, I think my sense is that tackling poverty is clearly a huge issue, multifaceted. It's quite difficult to scope in a relatively short audit exercise. But clearly, if elected members are so minded, then there's nothing to stop them inquiring as to management in terms of an evaluation of the effectiveness of their own policies. That should be an integral part of any programme and activity anyway. But as I say, I think Councillor Burrows recognise that we obviously have limited resources. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Ken. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with you, Councillor Burrows, offline on this, and we can certainly have that discussion. I'm conscious we've got more members looking to come in. Councillor Hume, I believe you're next, followed by Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. Couple of brief questions and equally brief responses, I hope. Page 25, the Digital NL programme. I noticed it's the biggest commitment in days that you have in your programme, Ken, and that's absolutely right. It was on transformation yesterday, and I get a measure of reassurance from Linda that the question asked about business continuity and disaster recovery in light of the council being it's a more critical aspect of the council's business that Digital NL is impacting on more and more areas that we don't expose ourselves to faults in those areas. So I just wanted to make sure that you would do a validation on business continuity and disaster recovery in your assessment of Digital NL. That's the first thing. On page 26, HR management of sickness and absence, and you can tell me you don't know the answer to this. That's quite acceptable, and I'll chase it up somewhere else. But in light of everyone working from home, how are we even recording sickness and absence? So if I don't know how we're recording it, how can it be measured? So that's one thing. And as I say, if you're not sure of that, Ken, how you're going to assess it, just say that and I'll chase it up with someone else. My third point is in relation to in a similar fashion to Bob's about the items in the Appendix 4 of things you're not doing anymore. And a couple of examples I noted were employee engagement and well-being. Again, there was quite a bit on page 39, mental health, well-being and resilience. You're not doing any of them anymore. And there was quite a bit in the transformation report yesterday about new measures the council are taking to ensure people's health and well-being. But I wondered if they went far enough, based on the fact, really, we don't understand the implications to people's mental health, physical health and well-being of extended working from home. So I think we need an assessment of how effective those measures are working that are planned, and are they really achieving the results that they say they'll achieve in terms of looking after and protecting people who are working in a completely different environment from their whole working life in the future. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hume. Ken, can you pick up on those points, because there's certainly.
Yeah, well, if I can deal with the digital NL point first, and clearly we've put a fair chunk of time in for that. That will be more than one exercise as the programme develops. In fact, we're actually nearing the completion of the first kind of piece of work we're doing on that this year. I certainly recognise, and I think we all recognise, I'm sure Katrina would confirm this, that resilience and the focus on business continuity is at the heart of much of the move towards digital. In fact, much of the kind of the underlying principles around the design of digital NL will, is bound to actually just make us a bit more resilient in terms of some of the kind of legacy systems and the multiple vulnerabilities we have at the moment. It will reduce the number of those. It will make us more susceptible to anything going wrong in those areas. Before Councillor Hume picks me up on that, but I think it means it's probably a little bit easier to address and control. And clearly, business continuity generally is something that all services have been focusing in on over the last 6 months in terms of how your current arrangements, how well their business continuity plans have operated, and as part of recovery, how they will make sure that those are any proposed new arrangements are sustainable going forward. In terms of the HR stuff, I'll leave if you don't mind, I'll leave the details of how we're currently kind of assessing staff absence to perhaps Fiona Whitaker, who I know is on the call. But in terms of the specific point you've raised about assessing whether or not we're doing enough around and whether that's effective around employee well-being, I think I'm sure Fiona can speak to that. But from my perspective, clearly it's something that from the various forums and groups that I'm on, I'm sufficiently encouraged that the council recognises fully the issues that this creates both in the short term and as Councillor Hume said, in the more medium term. We've put in place, I think, a range of arrangements at the moment. I'm sure Fiona can say more about those. And I'm sure from the feedback we've had, that as part of that process, there will be ongoing evaluation and monitoring of the effectiveness of what we've put in place and the indication around how staff are feeling. I mean, it's an issue I've actually raised in discussions about how we're actually making sure that we've got regular updates in terms of how staff are perceiving the new working arrangements. So I don't know if Fiona wants to come in on any of that.
Sure, I'll pick that up. Councillor Hume, in the interest of being brief, I know you asked for that, and also I'm conscious that those matters have actually been covered at quite some length in my own committee, Finance and Resources. I know Councillor Burrows is on the call, so he can testify to that. I'll very briefly answer the question about absence. So there's no change in terms of recording absence. We record absence very tightly. If somebody's at home working and they fall ill, they would still be expected to be in contact with the manager and they would be recorded absence. I would say the main area of absence that's changed during the COVID environment is the complexity of the different reasons for absence that we've obviously had to deal with. So if somebody's self-isolating, for example, they're not sick, they're self-isolating if they're actually sick with COVID. So the number of different categories of sickness that we've had to actually establish and report on is significantly higher, but we still have a very tight control on those who are sick, and we do expect managers to be in contact with staff on a regular basis. So there should be no impact on the recording of sickness in iTrent. And in fact, the recent improvements that we've made to iTrent means you can actually go into iTrent on your phone. You can go into it on any device. Managers can get into it on any device, so there should be no reason why, if somebody's actually not working from home and they're sick, that's not being recorded. Okay, so I'll cover that point briefly. In terms of the mental health and wellbeing area, I would have said significantly improved the offering that's out there during COVID. In terms of mental health and wellbeing, and I've certainly got some papers that have gone to committees that outline that in quite some detail. Councillor Hume, I'm more than happy to share that with you offline. We've also been doing surveys of those staff. So just for sake of illustration, we have around 3,000 staff working from home. So in terms of the full scale of the council's headcount, it's not a significant number. It's round about 3,000, so I just want to be clear about that. We regularly survey those staff and have made commitments to actually survey them on a bi-monthly basis. Again, I've got outputs from some of the initial surveys. Some of my IT colleagues and other colleagues on the call have been involved in some of that. So again, very happy to share that with you, Councillor Hume, so that you can see the information that we're getting back.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Hume, do you have any follow-up comments or questions?
No, I'm moderately reassured, but my concern is we're in new territory here. This volume of people have never worked from home from the council, and I'm glad to see all the measures that have been put in place. I guess what I'm saying, what I don't want to happen is we hear at some future date that people's are experiencing issues that the mechanisms in place don't cope with. I've been speaking to some staff that say they feel isolated working from home, and they miss sharing experiences with their colleagues at their desks or at lunch or whatever. There are a number of other obvious areas that people are exposed to when they're working from home on their own that the council have never had to deal with before. So I suppose I don't want surprises to happen, and if officers are comfortable that the measures we're taking will prevent that, then I'm prepared to go with that just now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hume. I mean, it's a really important point that you raised, but you're right, we are in unknown territory. I mean, we're all now working from home as well. I mean, we're used to all having committees together in the same room, but as if we are today, we're all in different rooms in different places because that's now became, unfortunately, the new norm. You're absolutely right in terms of processes. I mean, I'm sure this won't be the only time that we'll ever discuss sickness absences. It'll always come back to audit and scrutiny to look into further. I know it's not part of the audit plan, but it's certainly something that we can discuss as members, and it's always something that we can request if we want a paper to come to this committee to look into it further. So please be assured that if you do have concerns about this and you want it reviewed, there is always that avenue that we can go down in terms of audit and scrutiny. I believe that Councillor Johnson, you're next, and Councillor Burrows, you're wanting back in. I'll let you back in quickly after Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Convener. Page 26, second from the bottom, you mentioned reporting on pupil equity funding and the Scottish Attainment Challenge and reporting on the governance of this. I hope your starting point on the governance will be that the head teacher is responsible for, certainly completely for PEF and probably for SAC as well. I hope that will be your start. Of course, these things can change. The authority will maybe provide services to head teachers. They may actually work with cluster groups, etc. And there may in fact be some degree in the long term of removal of ring fencing by the Scottish Government so that local authorities can use these monies on a wider basis. But I hope your starting point will be the element of control that the head teacher has over F, certainly, and SAC, because that's been an issue in the past, and that is the starting point. That's the Scottish Government's policy of F, that the head teacher was in control of it. So that should be the starting point in any report there. The second things I want to raise are COVID related. One was on page 27. It's the financial systems key control, the council tax, and it's the adequacy and effectiveness of key controls for collection. Again, I hope you'll take into consideration people's mounting debts and the difficulties associated with COVID and a changing situation there. And the third one was community councils. Auditing them, that's probably going to be an easier job this year because, as far as I know, they're not meeting. So that's a simple point there I wanted to raise. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johnson. Ken, can you provide any further comments in terms of starting points when Councillor Johnson raised, in particular, SAC and PEV?
Yeah, I mean, SAC and PEV, I mean, obviously a key part of any audit approach there would be to ensure that the council is complying with all relevant regulations and guidance in relation to those funds, and clearly we would look to audit compliance with whatever the guidance was at the time, so that would cover off I think the point that Councillor Johnson has made. I think in relation to the point about council tax billing and collection, again, it's not for audit to determine council policies in regard to collection, so we would be looking to ensure that the council service was complying with relevant council policies and guidance. If that guidance or policy is changed or needs to change as a result of the ongoing economic circumstances, and I'm sure that's a matter that the finance service would take the lead on. And in terms of community council audits, yeah, I mean, I think I take the point. They will clearly have been fairly dormant for the last 6 months. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Ken. Councillor Johnson, does that provide you with some reassurance?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. I know you've been in before, but I'll let you in again quickly if you've got a further comment or question.
Just leave it, Convener. Just leave it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Is everyone, if we turn back to the recommendations, are we all in agreement with the recommendations? Thank you very much. If we could move on to now, agenda item 6 is split into section A and section B, and it's regarding the internal audit progress report. So we've got section A, which is January to March 2020, and then section B, April to June 2020. Ken, it's my understanding that you want to take these in 2 separate parts. Is that correct?
I think that would be preferable, yeah, in terms of allowing a focus on individual reports as required.
Agreed. Thank you. And if you could speak to part A firstly, please, then.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, this presents the 6A as the report, which would have gone to the panel meeting at the end of March if that had progressed as originally scheduled. Table 1 highlights the audit reports that were completed in the period covered by the report, and section 2, to paragraph 2.5 onwards, provides a little bit of narrative around those. 2.6, I've highlighted the creditors report, which obviously provided limited assurance, and I think that was on a particular focus in terms of aspects of the authorisation process. If you look at the audit report in relation to the detail there, I think you'll see that the service have acted quickly to address the issues which we felt that had arisen, particularly around some of the authorisation processes and clarity around who was authorising what in signing off batch headers. So I'm reasonably satisfied that those issues have been addressed. At 2.12, I highlight the management of strategic change report, and that's quite a kind of high level but highly significant report looking at how the council is managing managing the kind of strategic level programme of work that we've obviously referred to before. Whilst generally positive, I have highlighted at paragraph 2.14 that we did feel at that time, looking at the previous programme of work, that there was a requirement to look at improvements around reporting to committees in relation to programme of work items. to enable elected members to more effectively undertake their kind of oversight and role. And we've suggested that should involve providing elected members with a clearer sense of progress against key timelines and milestones and more specific timescales for expected future actions. And I suppose that point links quite closely with a report which we issued in the previous period, which commented on the need for improvements in reporting on key projects through to committees. And you'll see, I know that Katrina's obviously on the call here, but there was a positive response to that initial report, and I'm sure that will be, and this has been picked up in the same manner. 216, I've highlighted work we've done on the Enterprise Strategic Partnership contract, and that obviously was in the lead up to the presentation of the business case, which was submitted to elected members in March. So that was a fairly positive report. And the Housing New Supply Programme, I think there's some discussion previously in relation to previous coverage of that around some aspects of the way in which that policy had been taken forward. You'll see from the report there that we've given that a relatively clean bill of health and fairly positive comments. So I'm happy to take, that's me for the moment. I'm happy to take any.
Thank you very much, Ken. Do we have any comments or questions in relation to agenda item 6A? No. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Chair. Can I maybe just have a look at 74? I've got three questions, if that's all right with you. Page 74, when I read it, we are talking about the systems glitch there, Ken, and the reply. They've agreed your proposal there, but they say we agree that this finding presents a risk to the organisation. We will monitor the situation, and in the event that this rare system glitch occurs again, we will take action about it. So that's the first thing. Don't know if I'm really comfortable with that. And then if we go to page 77, and the management response in that one is partially agree. Now, normally, all of these, when audit is looking at things, we get agree, but this is partially agree. In other words, we partially agree, but we think we know better. Are you comfortable with that? And the third one is the insurance cover, just when I'm on anyway, for the likes of fraud. In the unlikely event that we get a major fraud, is there substantial insurance cover for the council in the event of a loss of that nature? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Creditors were mentioned earlier on, but Ken, would you be able to answer Councillor Watson's points raised there?
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to do so, although I might defer to Elaine in relation to the third part. But in terms of the system glitch issue, I kind of anticipated that somebody might ask about that. So I did contact the service, and the kind of ongoing monitoring hasn't identified the precise set of circumstances that led to that error having reoccurred. And clearly there is a sense that they don't understand entirely how that has happened, which is obviously concerning from an audit perspective. But by putting in place monitoring arrangements to try and detect, whether it's the A, they will identify if it happens again, and B, if it was to happen again and they have more instances of it happening, it probably allows them to better understand why it's happening. But as I say, I checked it, and that has not reoccurred. So hopefully the panel, and certainly I take some reassurance from that. I think in terms of the partial agreement, yeah, I mean, I think it's there. The management response is as stated. I suspect the partial agreement is actually because the head of service, who is responsible for that in terms of developing the guidance, wants to work through the kind of collective corporate grouping to take that forward. So I suspect there's an element of he doesn't want to give that personal commitment because it's partly the behest of it involves others. So I'm happy to take that away and come back if necessary and update the panel on how that has progressed. And the third point in terms of insurance cover, we certainly used to have it as part of our insurance cover, but I haven't looked at insurance coverage for some time. I don't know whether Elaine has any detailed knowledge of our insurance coverage.
I certainly wouldn't say I have detailed knowledge, but I'll answer as best I can. I think your question, Councillor Watson, is do we have adequate insurance? Now that's almost impossible to answer because obviously the extent of any individual loss could be different. We do have insurance in the event of a loss, but obviously it's subject to individual terms and conditions of the insurance policy, so it wouldn't cover everything. Over and above that, though, we do operate an insurance fund, which is sitting at the moment at a value of about 13 million, and the intention is that that covers uninsured losses or goes some way towards that. That has been assessed recently by our actuaries and has been assessed as sufficient. So in terms of answering your question, could I be confident that we're adequately insured for absolutely every eventuality? The answer to that would need to be no, but we do have policies in place and an insurance fund over and above that. I hope that goes some way towards giving you some comfort there.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, that's okay just now. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Councillor Hume, do you have a comment or question?
Thanks, Chair. On page 58, the last bullet point on the issue, management of strategic change. Oh, sorry, that was just for noting. It's actually 6B. I've got a question on. Sorry.
Not a problem at all, Councillor Hume. Do we have any further comments or questions regarding 6A? I mean, I think in relation to the creditors, apart from the point that Councillor Watson rightly pointed out, you know, I think there has been a significant management responses to the issues that were raised. Are members content with the response, or would we like to see a further paper? I'll take silence as no, so we'll just leave that then for now. And Ken, can I move on to 6B, please, if you could highlight some of the points in 6B?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Obviously, the kind of format of the report's broadly similar. It just covers a slightly different period. Probably actually, just before I go into the detail of the substantive reports that you've got full copies of in the pack, really just maybe reflect on those matters referenced at paragraph 2.5, 2.6 and table 2, which is in relation to the work that we did in relation to COVID. I think the report obviously references, and you know, it's clear that, you know, many council services had to significantly amend and in some cases significantly alter the ways in which they operated. Obviously, in response to that, there was a need to make sure that we had in place appropriate, effective and proportionate controls. And so we worked quite closely with management across a range of kind of key financial processes in particular, although not exclusively, to make sure that, you know, revised arrangements that management were proposing to run with were appropriate. Those reports, where we issued formal reports, are in table 2, but we actually, obviously, as you might expect, offered a variety of ad hoc guidance across the board on that. In terms of the reporting protocol, really just to head off any questions, the nature of those reports are such that they weren't traditional assurance-based format audit reports, and therefore I don't think it would be particularly appropriate to bring those reports into the public domain. I'm happy to share any individual outputs if any members have any particular desire to see them, but they were predicated on highlighting potential weaknesses in proposals that management are putting forward. Whilst most of those were addressed, some of them may have been partially addressed, and therefore I wouldn't want that to be more widely available. If I can move to the core audit work then. Table 1 highlights the kind of reports published in the period, and I think the one that I've highlighted first is that report, the only report which has a limited assurance opinion, which is in relation to our work on participatory budgeting, which I always struggle to say. And that was really a high-level review looking to provide assurance on the kind of adequacy and effectiveness of how well the council's responding to the requirements in that area in line with the relevant statute, which is the Community Empowerment Scotland Act. I think the report, if you look at it, I think we in the report we note that significant progress has been made by the service in delivering aspects of participatory budgeting, and that the governance arrangements that are developing are broadly in line with good practice. But we have highlighted, particularly at paragraph 211, that some of those developments will take some time to fully implement, and that there is a requirement really to, at that time of producing the report, to significantly upscale and accelerate the actions that we were taking forward if we were to meet the kind of causeless Scottish Government expectations around that. You'll see from the management response that a significant amount of action and activity has been progressed, and I think Lisanne McMurrich is on the call again and can speak to some of the detail of that if members are requiring that. Other report I would highlight really is just our work on carbon management, which again probably similar in tone in that it was a generally positive report. We've highlighted the number of relatively small issues that we consider management needs to address, but we have in that audit report highlighted the need for almost a significant step change in how the council takes forward that issue if we are to progress and achieve the aspirations around net zero emissions of either the Scottish Government or indeed the council, following the emergency motion that council passed in relation to that topic. So those are the two reports I really wanted to pick out, but obviously I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has.
Thanks very much, Ken. And obviously it has been noted within the participatory budgeting report as well that COVID will significantly impact future plans for PB, but I'm sure obviously if there's any questions, Lisanne will be able to answer that in more depth. On that note, do we have any comments or questions regarding item 6B? No.
Chair, sorry, I'm trying to go into the chat room and I can't get on. It's Councillor Burrows here.
Sorry, Councillor Burrows, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, it's just on participatory budget PB. It is hard to say, Ken, absolutely. Just to say that on page 104 at the bottom, and Kavina, you've actually just touched on it. Near the bottom there, it talks about the challenges, the amount of work that was done prior to COVID-19. But the bit I want to pick up at is the Council's participatory budgeting arrangement include potential impacts on the affordability of approved projects. That's what the words say, Kavina. Has anybody got any comment that they can make on that, Kavina, given the wording?
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Lisanne, can I bring you in firstly, please? And then, Ken, if you've got any follow-up comments or remarks.
I think it would be fair to say, Councillor Burrows, that we have had a look at the projects that were approved through the PB process to date, and all of these are either delivered or in a delivery phase, or now being stood up again post COVID lockdown. So hopefully that provides you with some reassurance about the projects that were approved within the financial envelope. I take it that's the question that you were asking.
Yeah, yeah. No, Lisanne, the words actually say potential impacts on the affordability of approved projects. Now, that's the current, I suspect moving forward there may be something, but it's the wording of current approved projects, which that's slightly different to what you're saying, or am I getting that wrong?
Can I take that one, since those words are actually my words in the audit report rather than Lisanne. So I think if they require explanation, I'll take that if that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at the time we drafted this report, clearly there was huge uncertainty about, well, there still is huge uncertainty about the council's finances. But I think at the time of writing that, there was really just from an audit perspective a sense of we probably need to reflect on whether or not things that have previously been approved but not yet committed to are still affordable. And I think from Lisanne's response, that's either wasn't the case or was the case, but they've kind of been assessed as affordable. So that's really the explanation for the wording in the audit report.
Thank you very much, Ken. Councillor Burrows, does that provide you with more reassurance?
It gives a reassurance. As Ken said, we're at a time of substantial financial problems. overall, convener. And I think Lisanne has said that the approved projects are fine. I think Ken, as auditor, would have just been, when he worded that, he was just make sure for himself in case of that. But Lisanne has give assurances, and that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Do we have any further comments or questions in relation to item 6B? No. Are we happy to note the recommendations? Thank you very much. Okay, the next agenda item is agenda item 7, and I believe it's the draft unaudited accounts for the year to 31st of March 2020. Elaine, are you taking this one?
I'll introduce very briefly, convener, if that's okay. The unaudited accounts are on the agenda today for your information, but because of where we currently are in the process with the audit progressing, we're very soon going to be in a position to present the fully audited accounts to you. However, today I'm going to ask my colleague Veronica to take you through the main highlights. I would ask that if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer. However, if they are of a very specific nature, I would ask that you provide us note of any very specific questions that you may have in advance of the next meeting where we go through the audited accounts. If we're comfortable with that, I would like to please pass on to Veronica to take you through some of the highlights.
That's great, Elaine. Thank you very much, and thanks, Veronica, for taking us through. If you could, just in your own time.
Yep, no problem. Good afternoon, everybody. The report, as Elaine says, it's presenting the 1920 draft accounts, which were completed and submitted to our external auditors by the usual statutory deadline of the 30th of June. It might also be worth noting at this point, normally we would issue a report to the panel in March time, which details any changes to the CITFA Code of Practice, which would be incorporated within the draft accounts. Obviously, you know the panel meeting was stood down at that time, and actually we feel that the draft accounts now supersede that report. But I just wanted to take the opportunity, first of all, to say that there weren't any significant accounting changes for the 1920 accounts. That report itself, however, would have highlighted the future adoption of IFRS 16 leases, which is highlighted in the covering report. And that was meant to take place from the 1st of April 20, but it's actually subsequently been postponed again in light of COVID to give people more time to prepare for it. And so that will now be pushed forward or pushed back rather, to implementation from 21-22. So again, just felt like we should highlight these things. Again, in previous years, the covering report also highlights any areas that required management judgment. And this year, those centred around the impact or the potential impact of COVID-19. We have worked quite closely with Audit Scotland this year just to make sure that any of these judgments that we had to take, that they were comfortable with it as well, and we took their advice on board. So the management commentary of the accounts basically provides a summary of the key aspects. So I'll just take you through the kind of key financial points to note. So for the General Fund, the Council's General Fund reported a £4 million surplus for 1920. And when we add that to our brought forward reserve balances, that increases our General Fund reserve to carry forward to 48.4 million. This balance has been carried forward into 2021, but it is represented by 31.7 million of committed resources. So that includes, for instance, early years expansion, grant funding carry forward, Devolved School Management funding, a commitment as well for digital investment within Digital NL. So that's all contained within that balance, but actually there's a further note to the accounts which will give you some more detail if anybody's wanting to see what that full balance is made up of. Also within the 48 million is an £8 million contingency fund, which again, Elaine as Section 95 officer deems to be appropriate for to keep for any unforeseen events. And what that leaves is 8.6 million of unallocated balances, which have been put into our change management fund to support the future costs of, or future one-off costs of savings implementation. So similarly with HRA, they had a surplus, or they've reported a surplus of 1.2 million. And that increased their reserves to just over 14 million, of which just under 12 million is committed. They have a contingency fund of 1.4 million, and they have an unallocated balance at this point of 800,000. Again, there's more detail contained within the notes to the accounts. I think it's note 27, which basically gives a detailed breakdown of the committed resources within 2021. So those are the kind of main highlighting financial points, but other points to note are maybe the pension assets and liabilities. We engage Hymans Robertson, who are actuaries, to provide us with updated valuation on our pension fund. And this year's valuation showed a reduction in our liability, which they explain as being a result of better than expected membership experience and investment returns. And it's also worth noting at that point that the 1920 valuation was the final year of our current triennial review period assumptions, so they have now since been updated in March 2020, but will take effect in future years. The Council's group accounts as well, following consolidation of Council subsidiaries, joint ventures and associates, adds a further 115 million of net assets to the Council's single entity position. And we do have a diagram within the accounts, which within page 82, I think it is, which shows all of the companies that have been considered within our group accounts and how we have consolidated them. Lastly, I feel like I'm going very fast here, but lastly, in relation to equal pay, a further 1.7 million was paid out during 1920, and that basically brings our total payments paid out to approximately 130 million since the first claims were settled back in 2006-07. So the provision now sitting on our balance sheet is 5.7 million, and we do anticipate that that should be sufficient to cover all the existing outstanding claims and relevant employer pension contributions where appropriate. So that's kind of the main points to highlight, and again, happy to take any questions, but as Elaine mentioned, given that the final accounts will be coming to the panel next month, but quite happy for members to contact me out with if they want something prepared in advance or brought back to the next meeting, if that's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Veronica, and we welcome that offer for questions to be sent directly to yourself and Elaine for further answering. I do see that Councillor Burrows has got a question. Councillor Burrows.
Thanks, Convener. It's not necessarily a question, it's just a comment if you'd been with us, Convener. It's just, you've seen the pack, the time taken to compile this comprehensive report is significant, Convener. And I think at a time when we've got considerable restrictions given the COVID, and I suppose you would expect me to say this, Convener, as Convener of Finance, I want to congratulate Elaine and all the team, because they got this report done on time by June the 30th. Other councils didn't do that. Other councils have used up the extension that was available, and we got this done in time. A lot of detail in it, but just to say on behalf of the members, thank you very much for all the team effort. It was worthwhile. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Burrows, and I echo the congratulations and thanks to the finance team for through the most toughest of times, managing to pull that report and get everything together, especially given the circumstances and the stress that they were under. Councillor Hume, are you looking to come in with a comment or question?
Yes, thanks. Just on page 2, 222, it was mentioned that changes to the leasing arrangements, and I noticed that revenue mentioned is mentioned and capitalised is mentioned as well. Is there any implications for budgeting in that, Elaine?
Sorry, as Veronica highlighted, those changes were actually stood down, pushed back to next year. But even so, we're prepared to implement these changes, Councillor Hume, and we had previously analysed them, and we reckon that they would be not material. I don't anticipate any concerns around when those standards do have to be implemented.
That's fine, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hume. I don't see any more comments or questions on the chat bar, and I can't see anyone indicating to come in. As Veronica clearly highlighted, this report will come to the next meeting in full for us to look over again. So that if there's anyone between now and then that have got any more questions, please take up the offer that Elaine and Veronica offered, or save your questions and they can obviously be asked at the next meeting. So if there's no further comments or questions, can we note the contents of the report?
Great.
Thank you very much. Okay, that moves us on to agenda item 8, and it's the external audit paper. And Carol, I'd like to invite you, Carol from Audit Scotland, I'd like to invite you to make some comments on agenda item 8, please.
Thanks, convener. I'll actually bring in my colleague Gillian, who's going to speak to the report. But before I do that, I would just like to extend my thanks as well to Elaine and everyone in finance. You're absolutely right, it was a massive task to pull the unaudited accounts together by the end of June, but it's not stopped there, because the audit process is undoubtedly putting additional pressure as well on finance staff. So just before Gillian came in, I just wanted to make that point, but I'll hand over to Gillian now.
Thank you.
Today to present our management report. This report covers the work that we've undertaken in the 1920 audit up until about May this year, so prior to starting our audit of the annual accounts. So it covers a range of audit activity that we've been working on that time. I'm going to just go through the report and spend a wee bit of time highlighting a couple of specific areas. If I could just take you firstly to paragraph 5, we mention our controls testing. We do that each year, where we test the controls in place for each of the council's financial systems, and it's worth mentioning at this point that we carried out this work this year prior to the restrictions that came in place as a result of COVID-19, so we acknowledge that changes may have came into the control environment since we audited these controls. We did identify some financial control weaknesses, and these are outlined at Exhibit 2. I'll come back to Exhibit 2 in a wee minute. Just got a couple of further points to mention. Paragraph 12, you may remember from our annual audit plan, we plan to place reliance on internal audit in terms of controls testing we're doing for income, cash collection and on housing benefits. We did review the work of internal areas, found it to be clearly documented, and there was a robust review process in place. To be in line with the auditing standard ISA 610, we have to do some reperformance of internal audits work to place specific reliance on it. And due to the current restrictions, we were limited in being able to reperform this work through no fault of internal audit. It was just being able to get the source back up for some of the items that we wanted to reform. So as a result, we're able to take wider assurance over this, but not specific assurance for our work in the annual accounts. The other point just to mention before I go into our main findings in this work was that when we were doing our initial systems reviews, where we sit down and speak with key contacts for each of the systems, we were of the council's open portal system, which at the time had just been rolled out as part of the digital NL rollout. We were just advised that at that time the uptake of the system was a lot higher than anticipated, which put some pressure on council resources, with each of the new registrations having to go through a full check of personal details. It was just worth highlighting at this stage. We didn't consider there to be a risk at that point, but it's something that we'll keep in mind for when we do our controls testing next year to see if it's had any impact on the financial controls in the systems that are related to this. Sorry, my phone charged, so it's all over the place. I'll move that. So moving down to Exhibit 2, where we've summarised our findings from our controls work. I'll just quickly run through each of these. Firstly, user access. So each financial system should have controls in place over users who have access to it. Generally, there's reviews in place, typically annually or biannually, over who has access to each system. And we found that, with the exception of the general ledger system and the payroll iTrent system, these hadn't happened during 1920. For iTrent it had happened, but the expectation was that it should be biannually. There's just a risk when these reviews aren't being carried out that users have access which is not at the appropriate level for their role, or that they shouldn't have access at all. Although I do acknowledge that there's other controls in place over the application for access in the first place. Moving on to point 2. Payroll validation checks. So this is now from last year being rolled out across all the services within the council. We're reporting this year, however, that we found it to be incomplete. There isn't a requirement at the moment, or as the management response says, they're unable to get a response from line managers or departments to confirm that they've reviewed what's been sent out to them and that it's fine. So there is still a risk that individuals could be receiving payment from the council after having left. Moving on to point 3, I think this was mentioned as well last year. There's been a delay in the update to the interface between the council's purchasing system and general ledgers. Similar to last year, this is just putting more pressure on council staff because of the manual input that's required and the risk that this can lead to in terms of human error, and of course there is a bit of a backlog because of that as well, which we do acknowledge that there are other controls in place, such as exception reporting, which can pick up larger value items. Point 4, and the last one in the table, there's a reconciliation that takes place between the housing rent system and the general ledger system, and at the moment, and as per last year, this is being conducted every 2 months. But at the time of completing our audit work, we found that this was falling behind a wee bit further. And again, with reconciliations, if they're not completed in a timely manner, there's a risk that the discrepancies or issues that they pick up aren't being addressed in a timely manner. So you'll see in the table that we've got a management response, so each item has been given a response from management, and we've also identified the additional procedures that we plan to carry out to get assurance for the financial statements over these. Just moving through the report, the sections that follow cover our wider dimension audit work. And first of all, we've looked for financial management, we've looked at the council's budget monitoring arrangements, and then the kind of year-end position of the outturn. The position at the year-end was that the council has a lower than expected surplus, largely as a result of COVID-19 additional costs. And moving down, we can see that while there were these additional costs, most services managed to achieve underspends in the year. Moving further down from paragraph 21, governance and transparency, we obviously assessed, there was obviously a change in arrangements following the lockdown and restrictions that were put in place, and we've provided comment on the council's changes to their governance arrangements and the impact in services. Given the early stage at which this was written, when these came into place, and the movement and what's happened in the last few months, we'll provide further comment in this area in our annual audit report. Paragraphs 23 and 24 cover the National Fraud Initiative. Our work on this year has been to consider the council's progress in investigating the matches which would have been provided to them in January 2019. Given the size of the council, there have been a large number of matches identified, but the council's taken an appropriate response to target high-risk areas and high-risk matches. So we think that's quite proportionate, and they're doing well in progressing these. Just taking you down to paragraph 27. So this year we carried out some best value work on the quality arrangements are in place within the council. That was also outlined in our 1920 annual audit plan. From the work that we carried out, we found that there are established equality arrangements in place within the council. From paragraph 28, the positives that we found in terms of the council's progress to their equality outcomes. And moving further down, we acknowledge that the council is quite clear on where they need to make improvements in this area. Finally, the last section of the report is in relation to our best value follow-up work. So the Council's Best Value Assurance Report was published in May 2019, and as with all councils who get this report, we then carry out a follow-up to see the progress on each of the recommendations that come out of it. There were 8 recommendations in North Lanarkshire's Best Value Assurance Report, and we've considered each in turn. It's worth noting that overall we've been really pleased with the progress, or the extent of progress for these recommendations, but also that we wouldn't expect each to progress at the same pace, so it's important to acknowledge that. Conclusion under each one about good, limited or reasonable progress, and you can see that. And again, it's worth noting that where there's been limited progress, a lot of these were impacted by COVID-19 as well, and the restrictions were put in place to kind of hinder progress in these areas. But I'm happy to take any questions rather than go into each one in a huge amount of detail.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and thank you for taking us through such a comprehensive report. I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of points that members can pick up on this. I mean, I think overall there's certainly some positives, but there's also areas for improvement, and we can't ever avoid those. They've always got to be addressed. I see Councillor Graham and Councillor Watson have both indicated to come in. Councillor Graham, can I bring you in first, then Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Kavina. In light of last year's experience with education and families, and I'll not embellish any further, what assurances can we get from management about payroll validation checks going forward? Now, I noticed in the commentary that there's a timetable, a timeline starting from last month, but it should be completed. Are we really confident, one, it's going to be completed, and two, that we're going to get a grip of this? Because we've got concerns. But certainly I have, and I know a number of my colleagues have as well.
Councillor Gallagher, you want me to pick that up?
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Graham. I'll try and explain this as best I can. So this is separate from, I know, the concerns that you all have given the report that came, the very difficult report that came last year in terms of education. This is more to do with the day and daily payment of teachers rather than those kind of issues. I'll try and just explain that when somebody changes their status, particularly when they leave the council, there is or was a paper form that's called a notification of change form that should be completed by the line manager and sent through to the employee service centre, who then process that form. And it's that form that makes the change necessary if somebody leaves the council to ensure we don't keep paying them. We have had specific issues with education in terms of head teachers processing them quickly and effectively. So there's been times where there's been delays between somebody actually changing their status or leaving the council and that form arriving with us. We've found it much easier in other services to get that level of compliance, but we've done a huge amount of work with head teachers, particularly in terms of head teacher briefings, and we are actively working to make that an electronic form and to cut out the business partner check that was actually in the middle of that process that delayed it significantly. So there is work underway to improve that. There's a second aspect to this which is unique to education, in that education still hold a lot of their staffing and their establishment data on a system that's called CMIS. So therefore, the full picture in terms of staffing establishment is held between CMIS and iTrent. That service is unique in that respect, that they do a lot of their establishment and financial planning on CMIS, but elected members are probably aware that that system will be phased out within the next 12 to 24 months. So we will take over in iTrent the processing of that data, which is currently undertaken in CMIS. So again, that will improve the control environment in terms of how we manage the payroll aspects of the education service. But I just want to reassure members this is absolutely not related to the content of that very difficult report that was covered, I think, about a year ago.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Councillor Graham, do you have any follow-up questions or comments?
Well, no, I'll take Fiona's assurance. I know Fiona well, my dealings with her previously, and I'm very comfortable with what she said. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. Councillor Watson?
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Graham has stolen my thunder, because this was an item that concerned me a great deal as well. So Alan and I are thinking along the same lines here. But thanks anyway. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Watson. Is there any other comments or questions that members have got on the Audit Scotland report? No? Councillor Burrows?
Yeah, it's just to actually double check. I've read the report, I've been through it all. Carol and Gillian, are you comfortable, happy with the report as we move forward?
Yeah, I'll come in there. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the controls work that we've carried out, as it's year 4 of the audit appointment now, we've seen an improvement in the control environment from the first year. And these are just things that probably seen improvement individually in. For example, the payroll one that we've just been talking about, we've reported that maybe in a couple of years, and each year we've seen improvements in the process, and it's just maybe about, you know, finalising that to kind of fully complete the control in place to get assurance. But overall, yes, and it's, as we've said about the best value follow-up and the equality, the kind of wider dimension work as well, largely positive, and we'll provide further comment in our annual audit report. A lot of stuff has probably moved on since we wrote this, so you'll see further comment on a lot of these areas in the next couple of months.
Thank you very much, Gillian. Councillor Burrows, does that answer your question?
Absolutely, Convener. Thanks very much, and thanks for Carol and Gillian. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if there's no any further comments or questions, Carol, Gillian, thank you very much for your time as always. You know, it's great to always have you along for your input and your comments, and obviously to present these reports. It certainly gives members an insight as to what's going well in the council, and, you know, areas that we can certainly pick up and improve on. So thank you very much for your time. If we can now move on to agenda item 9, I believe. And agenda item 9 is the Audit Scotland Accounts Commission report, and it's the City, Region and Growth Deals. Now, I know the Growth and City Deals packages have went to a number of committees and they've been discussed at a number of different platforms. But Ken, if you could mention some of the comments and the things that you'd like to raise within the report, please.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Well, this obviously presents the national audit piece that Audit Scotland have done on city deals nationally, and obviously there's a number of recommendations both for Scottish Government, for the programme managers and for individual councils. I think it's probably just worth emphasising that in presenting these reports and picking up on the point you've just made, you know, clearly city deal is reported through a variety of different ways, through different service committees, and in bringing this report to the panel, the intention is to provide you with hopefully with a sense that an assurance that the council is aware of and is responding appropriately to the issues and risks identified by the Auditor General and the Commission. I'm not going into a huge amount of detail because you've obviously had the opportunity to read the report, but the key messages and findings are obviously in section 2, and I think it's, you know, you and the management response is in section 3 and in appendix 2. And I think you can see there that hopefully there are no issues arising that cause the panel's significant concern. It's probably worth highlighting as well, just in addition to this, just to provide a bit of context around the audit of the City deal. I'm required annually to do work and sign off an opinion which I provide to City of Glasgow Council's Chief Internal Auditor, who has responsibility for the audit of the City deal Region Programme Management Office. And we've done that over the last couple of years with no significant issues being highlighted. Also this year, this year being 2019-20, so not this year, the Glasgow City Council actually undertook a piece looking at kind of governance and programme management across a number of the individual authorities, and that included work at North Lanarkshire. And again, that work was undertaken with a relatively clean bill of health. So as I say, I wasn't going to go into the detail. I'm happy to try and deal with any questions which arise, but as I say, hopefully the panel is comfortable and content that the issues that have been flagged up are being appropriately recognised and addressed.
Thank you very much, Ken. Do we have any comments or questions regarding agenda item 9? Councillor Hume?
Thanks, Chair. It's a bit strange. It's maybe requiring a members' debate on the panel. And it's really in relation to the recommendations. Consider whether a further report should be required. I've got two points of thought on this. One is the significant increase in spending in North Lanarkshire through the City deal. We've heard about particularly the Ravenscraig project. Unfortunately, the other thing is in Appendix 1, where it's a scrutiny tool that asks councillors questions about what they know about the City deal. I wasn't able to answer very many of them positively, so I don't know whether that's remiss on my part or whether it's some aspect of failures and information that presented to councillors. So that was really my perspective on this, and whether it was just me that was behind the times or other councillors felt that we hadn't fully been kept up to date with what was happening in enough detail to let us answer positively all those questions. So if it's just me, guys, feel free to say so.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hume. I mean, certainly, I think it sometimes depends which committees you sit on, which information that you get in front of you, or which papers are put in front of you to read. Obviously, there has been a number of reports to different committees at all different levels, and members have been able to raise questions with the teams, the City deal teams that we've got within the council. Obviously, the questionnaire, I mean, I was in the same boat as you. Some I could answer positively, others I would go, do you know what, there has been a few issues here, there's something that I've not received information on there. I mean, it's certainly up to members. I'm quite content, you know, for a future paper on City deal. It's such an important programme that's happening just now, and it should in most circumstances benefit all areas in North Lanarkshire Council, so it's certainly something that we should be keeping an eye on and keeping, you know, keeping up to date on. So I am content if members want a further paper, but I would just be interested, like Councillor Hume, to get people's opinion on that. Councillor Burrows, are you looking to come in?
Yeah, just to say I agree with you and agree with Jim to an extent that this is, like a lot of items today, a very important item. I think an ongoing report, it says consider whether. I think we should, absolutely. I think that would be important to keep it on there. If Jim is having a bit of trouble about the knowledge base, we're all the same to a degree, Jim, and that's something that we could do offline, away from a committee meeting. If there's a need, we can maybe speak to the convener on any item that we maybe need a bit more detail on anything. So that's a good point, Jim. Thanks, convener.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further comments and questions on the paper itself? Because if not, I would then move in terms of the recommendations, instead of consider, agree a further report. And if the committee members are happy with that, then if there's no further questions, I would just move to the recommendations and seek approval for that. Agreed. Thank you very much. If we can move on then to agenda item 10, which is the risk management update. And Ken, I believe it's yourself who's speaking to this report again, please?
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, the purpose of this report is obviously to update panel members on kind of risk management developments, including progress on reviewing and assessing the kind of current corporate risks. The report also reflects and considers how the council has responded to COVID-19 in terms of risk management, and begins to touch on some of the resulting impacts on key corporate risks and the council's risk profile. As you might be expected, significant attention has obviously been primarily focused on those risks that are most immediately and obviously negatively impacted by COVID-19, although not exclusively so, and the associated changing risk environment. So, and that's why we've got separate reports on the agenda on health and safety, which is clearly front and central, and financial management and financial sustainability. So those are the rationale for those two reports. In terms of the kind of content of the report, again, I wasn't going to go through it in a huge amount of detail, but maybe just pick out one or two of the kind of key developments. At the beginning of March, in response to ongoing developments internationally at that point, a new corporate risk was added in relation to pandemic illness to the corporate risk register, which brought the number on that to 24 risks. We would normally, at the end of March, beginning of April, have undertaken a sort of formal annual review of the corporate risk register. I'll report here that has not been done for self-evident reasons, hopefully, but we have, as the report makes clear, significantly reviewed and re-examined a number of the kind of key corporate risks, and we're continuing to progress that work at the moment on a prioritised risk basis, as is laid out in the report. You'll see that the 7 risks which were identified as priority 1 for reassessment are at the table at paragraph 2.5. And basically the narrative explains the process that we've gone through there. I think hopefully members can understand and appreciate the rationale for that approach and the impact on the revised residual risks, which I think from a kind of corporate sense, a corporate perspective, make sense. In terms of other developments, clearly risk and risk management is featured pretty front and centre in terms of the council's arrangements over the last 6 months, both in terms of the kind of gold and silver command groups as part of the resilience arrangements, in terms of the meetings of the corporate management team and ongoing work around recovery. And that's referenced, and as risk is a key part of those considerations. Appendix 2 I've actually presented, just for information, a set of key risk management objectives that we had actually agreed earlier in the year, and they were due to go to the panel in March. So that's really just to provide that sense of some of the kind of key actions and activities. And I think although we've been slightly diverted by COVID and dealing with the implications and impacts of that we are and will continue to progress that, and we'll continue to give updates to the panel in relation to those actions. Finally, 221, really just specifically to mention, as part of the review of the corporate risk around governance, leadership and decision making, the risk leads and those involved in reviewing have suggested that we look to include kind of good governance training as part of the suite of training available for elected members, and as part of given the panel's remit, we felt it might be appropriate if the panel would wish to endorse that as kind of good practice. If the panel was so minded, then we would ask the head of legal and democratic to add that to the members' training suite, and to actively encourage members to undertake such training. That ties in with kind of comments that Audit Scotland in particular have made around the significant role that elected members have in delivering good governance as part of council's governance arrangements. So that was really all I wanted to highlight. Obviously, we've got 2 further reports in terms of get into the detail of individual risks, but I'm happy to take any questions on that report.
Thank you very much, Ken. I see Councillor Burrows is looking to come in with a comment or question.
Thanks, convener. You'll mind that a previous report, convener, earlier today had highlighted about the issue linked to poverty, tackling poverty and the risks associated with that. You'll see the table on page 191. It's got it there as a third from the top. And in fact, since COVID's come in, the inherent risk category has went up. I then address you, as Ken has said, about Appendix 1, page 195, and it confirms, as Ken was saying, I mean, the items there. So I'm a wee bit, I know one's about a plan and one's about a risk, I get that, but where is the link? Because clearly, unless I'm missing something here, there's something here about tackling poverty. It's a high risk. It's shown here. But in previous reports, we all accept that it's a high risk and it's a much needed one. But resources, time and everything was a problem. Can somebody clarify, please, for that?
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. Ken, can you provide?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably just try and distinguish my comment. Well, I'd probably fail to distinguish between my role as kind of heading up the risk function and chief internal auditor. Sorry, I've got another phone going off. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, I mean, as I said earlier, nobody is and it's quite clear that the tackling poverty risk, when the current ongoing assessment is fully finalised, that it will be higher than it was before. I think everybody recognises that both the events of the last 6 months and clearly the impending economic impacts of the last 6 months will only make the situation that North Lanarkshire residents face much worse in terms of the poverty agenda. I would probably come back to the point that I think we're not saying from an audit perspective that it's unimportant. I think it's about timing, getting the timing of any audit work right. And I think what management are currently working through is identifying what responses they need to put in place and can put in place in terms of available resources and supports and policies and programmes to address that new landscape. And I think at that point, once we start to get a sense of how management is responding to that, then it probably becomes a point where we as auditors would say, well, you know, we identify what the management response is to this. We see it beginning to be implemented or arrangements revised, and at that point we might take a view that it would be a timely to do audit work. So, you know, I think what I'm saying is it's not currently in the 2021 plan. Would it be in the 21-22 plan? Possibly. I think we need to see how what the kind of the management response is to how that risk is going to be managed. What changes are there, and what's the you know, the underlying management arrangements that are put in place? Because clearly, as I said earlier on, the first and second sort of lines of defence are that management undertake that initial assessment of what they're doing, how well it's working, what sort of performance information do they communicate to elected members to say, here is how we are addressing this issue and here is how successful or otherwise we are or aren't in addressing it. So I take on board the comments and understand exactly where Councillor Burrows is coming.
Councillor Burrows, do you have a follow-up question?
Convener, it's not so much a question, but I want to make a comment on that. I think it's right, Ken, what you're saying, that it is a management role. It's the policy that drives that, and I get that. But when I looked at your early reports, it certainly wasn't in there for 2021. I get that, because it may well be that management plans has got to be implemented, and then your role is then to come in and check that. But there was even nothing that you could have put in your notes to say that we could pick that up for 21-22. That's where I'm coming from, because there was nothing in that about that. And it may well be that you didn't want to do that to push it forward into a following year, because things may change. And I also get that. I mean, I'm not being difficult here, Convener, about this. I'm trying to be a bit consistent, because clearly this report here is highlighting significant priorities up here. And in fact, the priority for these top four are increasing. Right, and they're not all in the plan. Now, I get it's a management policy issue. I get all that, but I think we need to tie both ends in together. That's all I'm going to say at this time, Convener. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burrows. I mean, I absolutely get where you're coming from, and I think, you know, it's useful for members to see that link. If something has been identified as a high risk, you're expecting management action, therefore, to follow. I do understand that. I think, you know, in terms of Ken's response, he's saying that, you know, because there's yet to be things to be implemented in order to look at these specific risks, to look at these concerns that are being raised. I mean, poverty is always going to be a concern for this council. It's in the agenda, it's in the plan for North Lanarkshire, and it's certainly, something that we discuss regularly, how we're going to tackle poverty at various different committees that we all sit on outside of audit and scrutiny. So I think, it's not as though it's not a priority. It absolutely is, and it is a key priority of this council. It's definitely one of the major plans for North Lanarkshire is to eradicate and tackle poverty as an issue. So, I mean, as I said to you before, happy to have offline discussions with you on this to see if there's a way that we can try and, tie this together and make it more consistent for elected members. If there is a risk, where's the action to follow, if that would be acceptable for you. Thank you very much. Do we have any further comments or questions? I see Councillor Hume in the chat bar. Yes to 221 to redo training on governance for members. Absolutely agree. And I would like to add that into the recommendations that members absolutely sign up to that, to the training on governance. Are we all in agreement on that point? Yeah. Thank you very much. Do we have any further comments or questions on agenda item 10? No. Are we happy to agree the recommendations? Thank you very much. Now on to agenda item 11, which is the corporate risk financial sustainability. Ken, I believe that you're speaking to this report as well.
No, that'll be me.
Elaine,
I don't get paid enough.
Okay, but this report does follow on nicely to Ken's previous update. I won't repeat any of it, but Ken has highlighted that one of the key corporate risks that are most likely to be impacted by COVID-19 is financial sustainability. So financial sustainability has been at the forefront of CMT's mind and Gold Command's considerations since the period from March. And a full assessment of the risk has now been carried out, and it is presented to the panel today to give you the necessary assurance that this risk continues to be effectively managed. So I really hope that my report does give you that assurance. You'll see from the deep dive documentation attached to Appendix 1 that the inherent risk pre-COVID was given a risk rating of 15 high, but the impact of COVID was to increase that rating to 25, and that's really on the basis that controls existed pre-COVID and they were effective in terms of dealing with an emergency situation, or a normal emergency situation, if you could call it that, but they certainly weren't devised to address the threat brought about by a global pandemic. So in response to that, we took it, Appendix, we introduced further actions to enhance the current controls and to further mitigate the impact of the risk brought about by COVID-19. And that's all of those additional actions are set out again in Appendix 1. And the key highlights there include we undertook immediately a review of all capital revenue and revenue plans with a view to ensuring that we could continue to afford them. CMT took early action, you've heard about it already at Council, to curtail all non-essential expenditure and implement a recruitment freeze until at least the impact of the pandemic could be fully understood. We've undertaken a mid-year review of the budget. Again, you'll all be aware of that, and we reported that to full council on the 13th of August. And that was so that we fully understood the scale of the deficit projected as a result of COVID-19. On the back of that council meeting, elected members and officers are now working on options to close the deficit and ensure that the council will still come in on budget. The financial position will obviously be closely monitored and will continually update and report back to elected members. But in addition to all of that, we made sure that finance were properly represented on all of the decision bodies and command structures. So we were members of my team, including myself, were fully involved in Gold Command, Silver, recovery groups, and continue to be so. There was key groups, including SITFA directors of finance, COSLA, Solace, etc., so that we could ensure that we were always in a position to provide up-to-date briefings to elected members. Development of an officers' budget group, we set that into motion right away, and it's led by me and attended by the directors and the chief officer of the IGIB, and that group now meets weekly just to ensure that the position and the options being considered to ensure that we come in on budget had been absolutely closely controlled. So these are just some of the key highlights. I hope you have been given assurance from this that the risk continues to be well managed despite the challenging circumstances that we do find ourselves in as a result of COVID. I'm happy to take questions on any.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I mean, I do welcome this report. I think it's very useful to give members an updated perspective, an updated outlook as to where we are, and especially the current key controls and management responses to COVID. I think that it's so important that we get to see that as elected members. I mean, I think it's safe to say that councils were struggling financially before COVID, and obviously this is why, you know, the risk is now even higher than what it was before. And we do understand that, you know, in order to address COVID and especially to look after our communities during COVID, that councils had to make tough financial decisions in order to, you know, balance the books, meet demands. So, you know, we understand the position that we're in, and it's just unfortunate, but we will need to obviously revise the financial outlook and go through a budget process again. But as we all know, that you can't implement policies to help and support people without there being a financial cost attached. So really welcome this report. Do we have any comments or questions in relation to agenda item 11 from elected members, or are we quite happy to note the recommendations? No comments or questions? Okay, I'll just take that as we're accepting the report as is. And if we could move on then to agenda item 12, which is our final agenda item today, and it's the risk management update, and it's the corporate risk level 5 and it's health and safety. And I believe, I'm just trying to flick my papers to the right page. Fiona, it's yourself that's taking this one.
It is, yes. Thank you, convener. So I'm just going to do a short introduction to the report. I'm conscious it's the last report today, but I'm going to do a short introduction just covering the main points of the health and safety risks, particularly those that have flowed from the current COVID-19 environment, which I'm sure will be of great interest to elected members. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Fiona Duddy. If you haven't worked with or met Fiona Duddy before, Fiona leads the health and safety function within the council, and that function have been significantly busy during the lockdown period. So I'm going to let Fiona take you through a lot of the detail in section 2 of the report, in particular a lot of the activities and the controls that team have put in place to manage the significant, broad and very complex risks that have flowed in the health and safety area as a result of COVID. So the points that I'm going to cover are in section 1. I'm just going to pick up on 1.2 around the Health and Safety of Work Act. And that's just to illustrate that the duty of care that we have as a council under the Health and Safety at Work Act to make sure that we provide a safe work environment for staff. And by safe, that goes on to the point I think that Councillor Hume raised. It's not just safe physically, it's also about people's mental safety, health and well-being. So that applies irrespective of what's happening within a pandemic. It also applies in any environment. So what I mean by that is it applies whether somebody's working in an office, whether they're in a depot environment, or indeed if they're in a vehicle or their own home. So that duty of care does not change in an environment like COVID. It applies irrespective. And also it's important to illustrate that the Health and Safety Executive have been very much involved as part of this and have made it clear that any risks that flow from a health and safety point of view as a result of COVID are reportable under their normal reporting circumstances. So what I mean by that is if somebody catches COVID as a result of their employment or doing or undertaking employment on our behalf in a particular environment, that is reportable under the RIDDOR incidents to the Health and Safety Executive. And I'll let Fiona Duddy just illustrate where we are in that in respect of cases of that we've had across the council. Thankfully, there are not many. I just want to move on to point 1.3 as well, that just to reinforce this point that is no exemption in terms of that duty of care, but it also applies where we put staff, as we do, into community environments. So as a local authority, we've got that broader duty of care under the pandemic not to spread the virus. So not only have we got that duty of care to our staff, but we also have a duty of care not to put our staff out into environments where they're either going to catch it in that community environment, or indeed if they're going to spread it in that community environment. So you've got that double focus for us as a local authority. It's fair to say that one of the most difficult challenges in terms of health and safety has been around the guidance that has been coming from Health Protection Scotland. So we very much align to Health Protection Scotland as our main source of information and guidance about how we put controls in place to manage the risks. And what I'm going to cover is obviously going to be very familiar to many of you. You hear it pretty much every day on the TV from Jason Leach, and he's one of the main people that we deal with in terms of these controls. But I'm just going to outline how everything is centred within that, and it'll help explain some of the stuff that Fiona might touch on later. So as a council, 2 metres and the 2 metre distancing is the main control that we are expected to put in place. But clearly in certain services and in certain circumstances, particularly as we move into recovery, it's not possible for us to maintain that 2 metre distance. So that's the primary control. When that primary control is taken away, we as a council then have to kick into other control measures that are important. So that includes things like PPE. So for example, for home care workers, where we have to put them into an environment where they're clearly at risk and they can't maintain 2 metres, there is all sorts of guidance that we've been given that tells us those individuals should be given and where within those environments. Equally, there are other now measures being looked at, including face coverings being one of those measures. If you're putting staff in an environment where they're going to be close together for less than 15 minutes, you have to look at things like screens. So for instance, in some of our vehicles, we're now having to look at plastic screens to be able to segregate people who are sitting close together and will be within 2 metres. So if that just illustrates some of the complexity of the different control measures that we've had to consider as we go forward, it will help you understand what some of the challenges have been for us in this environment. So clearly with that guidance coming to us, and the guidance sometimes has been one set of guidance a week for specific environments, what we have had to do with that guidance, because it's neither comprehensive nor is it exhaustive, we've had to interpret that guidance locally and actually put it in a form that our staff find easy to access and easy to use. So that they understand what it is we're asking them to do to keep them safe, and managers understand what it is they have to do to make those work environments safe. And we've worked very hard in partnership with services to make sure that we take that Health Protection Scotland guidance very quickly, turn that around and make it available to our services in a way that they can use. In addition to that, we've been required at every point to have localised risk assessments in place, and those risk assessments cannot be generic. They've got to be specific to a service, and in some cases specific to a building. So for example, a school. So the final point I just want to pick up is on point 1.6, and that's around our relationship with the trade unions. So they have been absolutely critical here in terms of us reassuring them that we are doing everything we possibly can in accordance with the guidance to make sure that we're creating a safe work environment. And I have to say they've been very positive and they've worked with us in a very strong partnership, but that has included us doing things like walk rounds in different environments, both with staff and with managers, to make sure that we absolutely are covering all their concerns and all their issues about whether that work environment is indeed safe, and if we've done everything we possibly can to make it safe. So those are the kind of main controls and pillars that underpin the work that was done since the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Fiona Duddy, who will give you a bit more detail and some examples of that work in section 2 of the report. Thanks.
Okay, thanks Fiona. Good afternoon everyone. So as Fiona's explained to you, I'm going to cover a bit of detail on the second part of this report. I would just like to draw your attention to 2.1 at this point, where there's actually an error on my part. The residual risk rating is showing as 9 medium, when in fact it should be sitting as 20 high. It does show us that further on in the report, so my apologies for that. Within section 2.2, we've detailed a number of the activities that have been undertaken to manage the situation. I'll not go into a lot of detail on all of them, I'll just make a few key points. 2.21 is about risk assessment. It won't come as a surprise to you that risk assessment's been a key feature within the pandemic for all services, and is in fact still ongoing, where guidance is being updated and also where we look to return more of our services as an authority. A good example of that is obviously education. We've recently returned the schools. My team are continuing to support all the services across the council as is needed, and we continue to produce section-specific guidance and what's needed in relation to risk assessment. 2.2.2 takes in a bit of detail about the digital side of things. My team were very fortunate in that we were already set up to work remotely. So when this happened, we were actually good to go, which was a real benefit. We've used a variety of digital means to communicate things out across the council, including using the likes of these virtual meetings. And one of the ways we've done for the head teachers, we've done briefings with basically every head teacher in our local authority, both before the schools returned to try and assist them in how they did that and answer their questions, and also after the schools had returned. Really back to what Fiona's mentioned about the guidance we've had. So everything we've done is in conjunction with the Scottish Government and Health Protection Scotland guidance. But as Fiona said, it's been ongoing changes and updates, so we've had to react to that very quickly. 2.2.5, we have provided comprehensive generic risk assessments and guidance for managers. We've assisted with their implementation as well, and we've made use of MyNL to make all of those documents available to managers wherever they are. They don't have to be on a council device to be able to access the information that's there. 2.2.6 was about personal protective equipment. Obviously, again, this has played a key part in how the council has managed our continuing services during the pandemic. The provision of PPE, so the availability, the accessibility of it, has been really well managed. There's actually a group within the council who continues to meet to make sure that that is maintained. And also, again, the guidance has changed as time has gone on, and more has been known about COVID, and we've had to react to that. And we have done very well, in my opinion. 2.2.8, the relationship with the trade unions, we've worked really closely with them. We've worked in partnership with them, as Fiona mentioned, walk rounds. We have weekly calls with them. We've been in consultation with them. Through that, I think we can see that we've reassured them and in turn reassured the staff as to what's been put in place for them. And if you could take any positives out of COVID and out of the pandemic situation, I would say that actually an enhanced relationship between the council and the trade union representatives is something that can be taken. 2.3 in the report just gives a bit of an example on how our team are continuing to move forward to what we're calling the new norm, and the work that we would normally do, but we now have to do it in a different way. 2.5 was about much of the work that we need to do has continued anyway. And Fiona's mentioned at the start of the report, you'll note there's no relaxation or exemptions for legislation. So we have continued with a large percentage of our work that needs to be done for that legal compliance. As I say, no relaxation or exemptions, quite the opposite. The Health and Safety Executive have been active and continuing to monitor local authorities. Most recently, they have done a phone round of schools to assess if they're happy with what's been put in place. And they're now following that up with some site visits. We've had 2 site visits carried out so far, both of which the Health and Safety Executive have said they are happy with what's in place. Work like our fire risk assessments as well has continued to ensure our legal compliance. So there's quite a bit of ongoing work. I'll just touch on what Fiona mentioned about RIDOR regulations. So we have a legal obligation to report any instances where someone has contracted COVID as a result of our work activity. So throughout the pandemic, we have had one RIDDOR report to date, and hopefully we'll have no further issues. Final point then I would make from the overall report is that this has been a massive challenge, not just for North Lanarkshire Council, but for us as a team. It's an ever-changing picture, and whilst we're not out of the pandemic situation yet, we have installed into the organisation robust procedures to help us to continue to manage our business safely. Our work on this is ongoing, our monitoring is ongoing of what's in place to make sure that we can react to anything further that comes our way from this. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much both. I certainly welcome the report. I think again it's useful for members to have that level of information in terms of the support that we're offering to our staff throughout North Lanarkshire. Certainly, delighted that you're having, good conversations, particularly with trade unions and various other bodies that all make up, different parts of the council and all important to the work that's been carried out. So well done and thank you very much. Just as an additional point, just before I open up to questions, the audit is currently doing work in both in health and safety and the financial stability, and both reports should be with the panel for the next cycle. So we'll see more of this in the coming few meetings, so just for everybody to keep an eye out for that. Do we have any comments or questions regarding agenda item 12? No. If we don't have any comments or questions, are we happy to agree the recommendations?
Agree.
Thank you very much, and I would just like to, on that note, just thank the health and safety team for all the work that they're doing, carrying out to keep our staff safe throughout the full of North Lanarkshire and everybody that we're working with. So thank you very much for that. If you can pass our comments on to the team, then that would be very much appreciated. Finally, just a massive thank you to everyone for attending today. And for bearing with us whilst we got through that very lengthy agenda item. It was always going to happen because we've been off for months and months, and our first meeting back was always going to be tough, but we got through it. So thank you very much everyone for your attendance today. Bye now.
Thank you.